Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Walker, I'll wait for you to tell me when to go.
So I think today's meeting is, I think we're going to have two guest speakers, Mayor Sanchez and two presenters from New Mexico Ethics Watch. I believe they joined us. So I think we are ready to get started. I've disabled video for other participants, just so the recording looks nice. But if anyone needs to have their video enabled, please let me know, either through the chat or sending an email to ethics.commission@state.nm.us.
Thank you.
With that, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Walker. Morning again, everybody. And we will call the meeting to order first by calling the roll of the commission. So, Commissioner Baker.
I am present.
Commissioner Bluestone. I hear nothing. Commissioner
Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear you.
I'm gonna mute the non-commissioner participants briefly now so that we can try and limit the crosstalk. Sorry, go ahead.
All right, so let's try that again. Commissioner Baker.
I am present.
Commissioner Bluestone. Okay. Commissioner Carruthers.
Present.
Commissioner Solomon. Commissioner Villanueva.
Here.
And Commissioner Williams.
Present.
Note that the chair is also present.
No, I saw Commissioner Solomon a while ago.
Yeah.
He's here.
Present.
I see him, yeah.
I finally gained permission to speak, so thank you.
What about Commissioner Bluestone? Anybody?
I'm reaching out to him now to figure out.
Okay. Thanks. I'm going to go ahead with everybody's permission. We have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and start when he gets on. Let the meeting minutes reflect that he has joined us. Okay, Sonny, I'll leave that to you. Before approving the agenda, we need to add one more item. Well, I will ask that one more item be added. And the chair moves to add the issue of whether the commission approves amicus participation in State v. Gutierrez et al. To the Supreme Court case involving the government corruption matter that we were allowed to participate in at the Court of Appeals level. And we need that as an agenda item in order to discuss whether we approve that participation or not. So I'm moving to have that added to the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? And we will discuss the substance of it later, but if there's no discussion, then Commissioner Baker?
I agree we ought to add it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bluestone, are you here yet? Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon? Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
And Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're good. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. That will be added to the agenda. So let's move on then to the approval of the minutes of our September 14th commission meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone? Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, minutes are approved. We'll now move on to item number 4. Jeremy, I will let you introduce our guests.
Great, thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Commissioner Bluestone and I have had a few telephone conversations with the Mayor of Espanola, Javier Sanchez, who is with us this morning, and he's agreed to present on challenges that local government bodies, in particular Española, face in both in enforcing ethical rules at the local level, but also administering just the institutions of ethics enforcement at the local level. And we've asked Mayor Sanchez to speak today just to give some insight for the commissioners to get some insight into what's happening at the local level as the commission goes forward toward its October 1st, 2021 report to the legislature, where the commission will have to decide whether or not to recommend expansion of the Ethics Commission's jurisdiction for local officials and employees. And so with that, Mayor Sanchez, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and please take it away.
Hey, great. Thank you so much for the introduction, and members of the commission. I really appreciate the time and the voice. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that, yes, we would really appreciate the increased capability of the commission to oversee publicly elected officials at the local level. And I just wanted to sort of give you a backdrop, some ideas for where we're at, what I'm facing, and maybe some of the specific actions that we could look at. So first, just a quick little introduction about myself and Española. Again, my name is Javier Sanchez. I was elected 2.5 years ago, mayor of the city. And one of the things that I was really looking forward to when I ran was changing the perceived politics of northern New Mexico, which we referred to then and still do as sort of the area where movidas take place. That's a Spanish word for moves, hand under the table, that kind of action. This is also the patron system, where all of the actions that leaders take have to be okayed or come up the chain, the ranks for different different situations. And a lot of the times, in thanks for kissing the rings of all of the locally elected officials or the patrones from each different area, a lot of the times the idea is, in order to thank them, you have to give them something back once you're in office. And I may or may not be exaggerating that, so I don't want this to be perceived as though that's the true kingdom or the way that things work. And please also note, my own biases, right? You'll be hearing from me as not only an elected official, but I have my own sort of ideas for what can make things better and the perceived state of where we're at. But I just wanted to give you sort of that backdrop that I feel like I'm working in. And some of the realities are the fact that there are still counselors that believe in that old patronage system, believe that the way that things used to work are the only way that we know how. So one of the characteristics that I'd really like to bring to light is the fact that we are a community that really doesn't like change. That's no different from any other small community anywhere else in the country, I would say. But in addition to that, we have a real aversion to outsiders. And what that does is it makes it extremely difficult for us to answer our own ethical questions within a small community where we think the same, we are the same, and we've done things like this for the past hundreds of years, so it should still be okay. I mean, one of our favorite sayings is, well, it's always been done this way. I mean, how many of you have heard that? And in particular, in a very small northern New Mexico town, that is truly the essence of our being. And for greater clarification, I'm not originally from here. I've been here for about 22 years, and I'm still a newcomer to this area. And I'll tell you that I'm a newcomer because in various sorts of lights and ways, it's just the way it is. So having been here for 22 years, I still haven't proven myself to be a local, but nonetheless, these are some of the challenges that we face. So I'll give you a little bit of a backdrop on what our current ethics capabilities are at the city. And I'll bring to you the very specific situation that we have. We have a counselor who was sort of the being investigated by our police officer for having done something that I don't believe has shown evidence sort of in a judicial system, and or at least was thrown out. And whether you believe the political system or not, maybe there was sufficient evidence, maybe there wasn't, but it also just so happens that this counselor is very good friends with the DA's office, was a very big contributor to his campaign for U.S. Congress, and the DA then, and I guess I don't want to make any assumptions, but due to a potential conflict of interest, was farmed out to somebody of his choice, and so that was then removed from the legal system. Now, again, I think one of the challenges that you will face is determining whether or not there are ethical questions that are independent from potential legal action. And that's one of the things that we would be looking toward. Even though there may not have been any illegal activity, the question about an ethics situation is still very relevant to us. And so, quite frankly, our police officer, when he was looking to send this to the right body, wanted to send it to the Ethics Commission, but then we realized, well, it won't be able to be heard there because the body isn't capable of doing so. So frankly, we're left with this complaint in our hands with nowhere real to go. And so now that it does get a chance to go to the city council, our ordinances are so archaic and so old that we can miss something very easily. And I'll give you the timeline of sort of what has happened and what our ordinance does and allows for us to happen. And part of it was my mistake. When I was elected mayor, I didn't know this, but in our ordinances, I was supposed to have created an ethics board. And that board would have been created with 2 names from every councilor and including the mayor, which means that we would have had a total of 18 people created and established to represent on that board. When a complaint comes to that board, the mayor and 3 other councilors would decide whether or not that complaint had merit and then take it to that board. Then 5 names would be drawn out of a hat from the 18 names, excluding the 2 names from the complainant. And that board would then hear what is happening. So I didn't create that board way back when because I honestly didn't know that that was in the ordinance, something that I had to do. So now we find ourselves in a position where a complaint has been made against a counselor, and we are now putting names in a hat that will listen to this case. So people have already heard what's going on, and in my opinion, it's not rather ethical on either side to create names that will either be against that counselor or only in support and in defense of that counselor. I mean, that's not, in my opinion, an ethical board at all, right? Because all we're doing is either being completely for or against a particular person, and it's a lot harder to find, I think, any kind of resolution on either side that will be able to resolve the issue. So one of the suggestions that I made in council was to farm this out, either to another municipality or to a completely different body that might be able to listen to the case completely independently. Now, that was shut down by many of the councilors because they felt that it's already in our ordinance, we have to follow the ordinance, which, by the way, we hadn't, right? Because the board hadn't been established. But not only that, the timeline had already been canceled because of the fact that it was supposed to have been heard within 30 days, which it didn't because we weren't ready yet. So all of these factors were already messing with the ordinance. So I said, might as well make it completely independent. Fortunately, it just didn't go that way. And so now we just find ourselves literally when each name was taken out of the hat, you could hear a yes or a no, because we wanted it to go one way or the other. And again, that just sort of precludes any sense of an ethical nature to begin with. Then one of the names had to be withdrawn because he did business with the city. So now we have another one with alternates. So quite frankly, it's a mess. And one of the reasons that it's a mess is because, as I mentioned earlier, I failed to create the ethics board. But I can assure you going forward, everybody, when let's say the next, let's just say I run again and I win, and it's time to create an ethics board at the organizational meeting, I can assure you that everybody is going to put people in their pocket that are either for one side or against the other side. So I don't see how we will be able to create an ethics board going forward that will be independent and be able to clearly hear evidence before it when the political nature of our situation makes it virtually impossible to do so. And as I mentioned, many of these issues are mostly related to the fact that uh, just by virtue of politics where we're at, I think it's really difficult to create that independence. So, I think those are some of the challenges that the city of Espanola faces, and I just wanted to give one example of how I think things are changing and how I, at least in my shoes, I'm trying to change the idea that we're here to serve our self-interest and how we're here to actually serve the interests of the people of Espanola. I was talking to our city clerk just the other day, and she was in the office at the previous administration, and she was the deputy clerk at the time. And our current city manager, who wasn't really in the office at the time, asked her, "What is different now in this administration from past administrations, in your view?" And one of the things that she said, and it came as a surprise to me, was that the biggest difference is that the halls in City Hall are currently sort of empty from city councilors who would spend all day at City Hall just trying to achieve and pass some of their pet projects. Now, I am totally for pet projects. And in fact, that's why city councilors are elected, so that they can make sure that the constituents that they serve are represented with whatever ideas and developments that they want to create. But the difference was a lot of the counselors were there to very simply implement friends projects, if it was a credit card processing company, or whether it was planning and zoning, trying to zone areas for friends, or whatever the case is. I mean, that was very much the definition of the movidas that I was talking about. So, when we leave our employees to do their job and do the work that is necessary for the city, that to me is a huge accomplishment. Quite frankly, probably one of the best compliments that I've received, not whether I'm doing a good job or a bad job in any one particular direction, but that we actually allow the employees of the city to do the jobs that are required of them. So that's one of the pushes that we're trying to make here at the city, and it's difficult and challenging. One of the sayings that a friend of mine gave to me was, just be careful, because the biggest challenge to a new regime is the old regime. And we get that all of the time, not just for the sake of political maneuvering, but for the sake of institutionalizing a way of doing business that is very hard to change and get rid of. So those are some of the tasks that I have. And again, the ask is to expand the role of the Ethics Commission to be able to be that external, deliberate, and objective party that can assess what is happening at the local level. So not only, I think, will it help Espanola, but I'm sure that this will help a lot of other smaller communities where sometimes you just, by the nature of things, your city manager is related to the city clerk, or whatever the case is. So I think it would be very important. And in addition, a lot of these changes are sort of beyond our scope. In other words, if we had a standard that we wanted to approach, we wouldn't really necessarily know how to do that. And I think working at the higher state level is something that not only I, or the commission, I'm sorry, or the counselors, but also the citizens will say, hey, if it's good enough for the state or the country or whatever the case is, then we can point to that and recognize it as having meaning in the everyday activities that we partake in, so that we can slowly start to change the methodology and the impact of just a long period of time of how we used to do things. So I hope that I didn't ramble on too much and that it made sense. I just wanted to thank the commission again for being willing and open to hearing a suggestion from me, in order to make this something that we can look forward to going forward. So if anybody has questions, either in specificity or in general, I'd be more than happy to accommodate.
Thank you, Mayor Sanchez, for taking the time out of your, I'm sure, what is a busy schedule and sharing your thoughts and observations with us. Commissioner Baker, do you have any questions?
No, sir.
All right. How about you, Commissioner Carruthers?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mayor. Mayor, you've been, I think I heard you say, Mayor, for about 2.5 years. You probably have gone to a number of meetings with other mayors. If in fact the commission were to determine that we could be of service to municipalities in providing ethics support and ethics hearing, how do you think the other mayors that you're aware of would feel about it? Do they face the same challenges that you face? And would we be helpful in trying to resolve some of those challenges?
That's a good question. You know, specifically, it's been hard for me to really open up to the specificity of our situation to other mayors. I think because of our proximity to Santa Fe, in fact, that was the city that I wanted to farm this out to. I don't think that they necessarily would have wanted it, because then here they are making a judgment in a way that they haven't had to do, you know, in the past. But I think a lot of the smaller towns would really appreciate it because of the fact that either we're looked upon as doing something strange and illegal because we're trying to move the city in a particular direction, you know, in which case the ethics board will help them to be reassured that what we're doing is proper. But I think what really makes a difference is that, as I mentioned to you, one of the commonalities with several of the other cities and mayors that I speak with is that there are a smaller number of people to choose from that can make those decisions. So you know, I haven't had very specific discussions about an ethics board to other mayors, but I couldn't imagine that it would be very different from what I'm experiencing as well.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm thinking that it would probably be useful, particularly for smaller communities, to at least have access to appeal a decision or to take a case to maybe this particular commission, because I know how politics can be locally. I came from a small town as well in New Mexico, and it might be certainly easier politically to have that case moved to, as I would say, another venue, and that venue might be the State Ethics Commission. So I appreciate your comments and understand what you're saying, and I'm hopeful that we can deliberate on this and see if we can be useful to the communities.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone. Sorry, I jumped over you. I have you on my roll now.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciated your comments very much. I was particularly impressed with the op-ed you first wrote, talked about these movidas in northern New Mexico, and reached out to you, and you were quick to respond and be willing to come and testify today. And I think that your comments are very thoughtful and give us a good opportunity to continue to explore with you and others in your similar situation, whether we as the statewide ethics commission should be expanding or seek to expand our jurisdiction to be a resource for folks in your position. And following up on what Governor Carruthers just said, I think it would be very helpful if it's appropriate, if you wouldn't mind, to speak to not only other members of your community and other mayors in your position, but to the New Mexico Municipal League in particular, and see if there's any way of getting a statewide consensus forum about whether it would be helpful to you and other similarly situated mayors and municipalities and local governments to have this ethics commission be available for the kinds of problems you're talking about. And I think that it's going to be, if there is a movement to do that, it's going to take a lot more resources for us to manage it. And we're going to have to be very deliberative and thoughtful about how we go forward. But I think the first step has to be whether you and other similar situated mayors and municipalities would want that to be considered by the state legislature, because we need to have that interest if there is going to be a movement to go forward. And so I would urge you to keep pushing that and to keep us advised on what you're learning.
I appreciate that very much, and I haven't had specific discussions with AJ Forte, who's the head of the Municipal League, regarding whether or not to have the commission board expand its role. But when I was telling him about some of the issues that we had, I'm just sort of explaining that, well, this happened and then that happened, and he's like, holy cow, oh my gosh. And he said, well, sounds like a Monday morning to me, because I get all of these calls on a very regular basis. He said it wouldn't be a week if I didn't have discussion about a harassment issue or whatever the topics are. So he's fully aware that municipalities, and in general the smaller ones, have those kinds of issues all of the time. And I think that there could certainly be a way to leverage that in a way that says we need greater clarification, we need more help in a way that is sort of able to encompass a lot more of the state than just individuals trying to solve this one at a time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner Bluestone. Commissioner Solomon? Commissioner Solomon, going twice.
I'm asking him to unmute himself here. So
Thanks, Walker.
he's now unmuted.
Commissioner
Okay.
Solomon?
Yeah, I'm having trouble kind of unmuting myself here. I'm not sure why.
Sorry about that.
But no problem. Thank you, Mayor, first of all, for your leadership. I too come from a small tribal community and certainly understand the dynamics of that kind of leadership. And part of the kind of struggles that we go through include, probably as in the case of Española, is the education of the elected leaders, particularly those that are legislators, to understand the role of the Ethics Commission. And I'm wondering, what role we need to play in terms of educating the legislators in that particular area, or perhaps through the Municipal League. I'm aware that Governor Carruthers has had an opportunity to speak with them, but maybe something of that nature would still be required to kind of bring everybody up to speed, because not everyone really knows what the role is of the Ethics Commission, and also what it is that you are trying to achieve here. And I know a lot of that has to do with the local support in the community for a move to expand the jurisdictional base of the commission, especially under the circumstances in which you're operating. So really focus being on what's our role to try to help people understand the role of the commission, and then thereafter what an expansion of that role would mean to a community and other communities like Española. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Solomon. Commissioner Villanueva?
Mayor Sanchez, I just have one question. Is your council aware that you are addressing the commission this morning, and more specifically asking this question asking us for help?
That's a good question, but no, ma'am, I haven't addressed this with the council. A couple meetings ago, when we were talking about the ethics situation and where we were at, I made the plea that we take this to a third-party council member or another city or something like that. And that was rejected. And so we're going to proceed with the case that we have at hand currently. So with the ethics board that we've already created. So I know that anything that we can achieve right now and at this time will take much longer than what we can achieve on a short-term basis. So the reason that I'm here before you now is because I expect that this is a change that'll take a long time to actually occur. And, I think I wanted to start this process, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now. I think it's a direction that is well worth taking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams?
Mr. Mayor, I cannot thank you enough for bringing this before us because I have had experience in regard to the corruption that exists in some of these cities and the counties. I was hired as a consultant for 2 cities in New Mexico, which I shall not name. I was asked to clean up or try to point out what was going on that was a corrupt, collusion, etc. I found vast corruption and collusion with regard to the establishment of salaries, with the violations of the Fair Labor Standards Act, with the violations of their own policies and procedures, and it went on and on and on. I was appalled. And I think there's more corruption going on in the cities and the counties than there probably is in the legislature. So with my experience, and as a matter of fact, one of those issues evolved into a mediation, which I'd handled before I got the request to be a consultant, where we had to pay out a taxpayer $69,000 to an employee who was involved or tried to blow the whistle on some of this corruption. And I can tell you it's very, very deep and it's very, very bad. And I applaud you for bringing this to us. And I strongly urge, and I know it'll be more work for us, but I strongly urge that we consider extending our facilities to the cities and the counties. So God bless you for bringing this to us because I know what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. And again, just before signing off with you, Mayor Sanchez, I want to reiterate what the other commissioners suggested. We give you great thanks for your reaching out with your editorial and following up with Commissioner Bluestone and Director Ferris. So thank you, Godspeed, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time that you've allotted me today. Thank you.
You betcha. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to agenda item number 5. And Walker, if you can find Ms. Sabo and Mr. Ortiz from New Mexico Ethics Watch, which I'm sure you can.
I think we've got Ms. Sabo up, and I think Mr. Ortiz is on his iPad. So let me go ahead and ask him to start his video and unmute himself here. So if I've got the right iPad. Yep. And I think we're ready to go. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Walker. Mr. Chair, members of the commission staff, I'm Kathleen Sabo. I'm the Executive Director of New Mexico Ethics Watch, and I'm here today with my colleague, Tony Ortiz. He is our top-notch legal consultant. He was formerly with the Legislative Counsel Service, and then he was the Director of the New Mexico Sentencing Commission. We're grateful and lucky to have him with us here today. And we thank you for having us here during what we know is a very busy meeting. So we'll just proceed without delay here. We're going to be talking to you about 2 of the acts that are under the jurisdiction of the commission, 2 that we feel are ripe for reform. We'll be talking to you a little bit about our work with them and then about reforms that we might suggest. Those 2 acts are the Financial Disclosure Act and the Lobbyist Regulation Act. I'll first be discussing the Financial Disclosure Act, and then Tony will pick up with the Lobbyist Regulation Act. We've submitted materials to the commission ahead of time, and these can be found in the public and commission packet starting on page 53. And if you care to go to them, you can certainly go to the first hyperlink in our letter to the commission, which is on page 53, and you can go to the Financial Disclosure Act if you wish. I know that each of you are familiar with it. You each filled out a disclosure, even though you did not have to, and we certainly commend you for that. But if you go to section 3 of the act, and specifically subsection D 1 through 8, it's where it's set out the details of what's required in each disclosure. And as you may have had as your experience, it's not very detailed information. It can be for some with a lot of real estate holdings or other things, but for the most part, it's something that doesn't require a lot of work, and we feel that it's weak, and I'll go tell you why we feel that way. We began publishing reports on the Financial Disclosure Act in 2017. We provided recommendations for reform to the legislature, the Secretary of State, and where appropriate to the governor when we were discussing statements of the boards and commissions. From the beginning, we found a lack of review and enforcement. We found administrative issues with the database and a lack of full compliance by some public officials with the letter and the spirit of the law. Our most recent full report, completed in September 2018, reviewed hundreds of completed forms. This was just before the 2018 election. After the report was published, I had a reporter ask me, "Why do you think you keep reporting on this and there haven't been any changes? Do people care? And why don't they care?" And I can point to 3 reasons potentially: a weak law, a lack of personnel in the Secretary of State's office to review forms and enforce the law, and a casualness, a sort of legacy of laxity, if you will, in complying with the law. The law was passed in 1993. It went through 6 committees, 3 in each chamber. There were an immense amount of floor amendments, and it was thoroughly vetted. But perhaps we're in a different era now than 1993. I'd like to think that we are. And in fact, when I was discussing this with our board chair, Justice Bosson, who many of you know, he said that he thought that lawmakers might be embarrassed today if they were to pass a law that was this weak and required so little in terms of disclosure. So although our last report was published 2 years ago, we're still committed to reforming the law and the financial disclosure form itself. During this 2 years, we've met with the Secretary of State and her general counsel and the head of the Elections and Ethics Bureau within that office to suggest using a more robust form that would capture more information within the confines of the existing statute. Now, we feel that these disclosure statements could be an amazing tool for voters and citizens if they can find the statements. So the first thing you'll note in our packet, other than this letter, is a letter that we sent this past Monday to the Secretary of State, informing the Secretary of State, the General Counsel, the head of the Ethics and Election Bureau, and CCing all the candidates involved, that financial disclosure statements for 12 general election candidates for state Senate could not be found on the database, even though under the Financial Disclosure Act, candidates are required to file financial disclosure upon declaration of candidacy. Tony himself collected that information, we verified it, and the forms were inaccessible. We've had another consultant looking at the financial disclosure statements for general election candidates for the House of Representatives, and she informed me yesterday that out of the 137 House candidates that she's looked at, there were financial disclosure statements missing for 24 of those candidates. They just can't be found in the database. We went through this route of notifying the Secretary of State and the General Counsel and the head of the Ethics and Election Bureau and all the listed candidates about inaccessibility, because the Act in Section 5, and so that's 10-16A-5, anybody who's following along with the statute, the Act requires the Secretary of State to, quote, seek first to ensure voluntary compliance with the provisions of the Financial Disclosure Act. So despite being advised and educated by the Secretary of State on the duties one is required to perform under the Act, public officials are given a chance to cure any issues with the form over a 10-day period. Again, according to the statute, quote, referrals to the state ethics commissions for enforcement of the Financial Disclosure Act shall be pursued only after efforts to secure voluntary compliance with the Act have failed. So to date, we've heard from 2 candidates who promptly revealed that they filed their statements with the appropriate county clerk. So either the clerk did not transmit the statements to the Secretary of State as required by statute, or their statements were lost or misfiled or mislabeled in the database. We've asked to be notified when these statements are accessible in the database. We have not been notified yet. We'll be sending another letter listing the inaccessible House candidate statements shortly. So just to show how current this is, and You've certainly seen it arise before the commission during this election period, and we're still working on this over the years. We've included in our packet portions of our 400 plus page 2018 report, and it begins on page 57 in the packet. And we include our recommendations to the legislature and the Secretary of State and our conclusions. And our conclusions are numerous. Our recommendations are numerous. I don't want to go through all of them with you today. Those can certainly be read and considered. I'm scrolling now, though, to the conclusions because I want to tell you what they begin and end with. I'm almost there. So the conclusions begin with, there is widespread confusion regarding how to complete certain sections of the form. And I don't know if this occurred for any of you in completing your own statement, but it's certainly something we've noted with a lot of people who've completed the form. Our conclusions end with, the legislature could amend the Financial Disclosure Act to eradicate confusion as to how to complete the forms and to strengthen the disclosure requirements using the laws and experiences of other states as models for clarity and strength. And within this report, we do, there's a chart and there's discussion about how other states handle these issues, much of them much more robustly, and then we compare that with New Mexico. So that's certainly in the report for you to look at as well. I do want to talk about a couple of the recommendations, just to bring them up for you today. So some examples of our recommendations are expanding the individuals for whom a filer must provide information to include domestic partners, children, and members of the household, and more, as some states do. Number 2, require reporting tiers of economic interest for all disclosures, income, real estate. So we know if someone receiving $5,001 from an income source or $500,000. So it's clear how significant a reported financial interest is. Number 3, provide the Secretary of State with statutory authority to promulgate rules and regulations regarding the Financial Disclosure Act. This is not provided for in the Financial Disclosure Act as it is in the Campaign Reporting Act and the Voter Action Act. So the Secretary's hands have sort of been tied since 1993 due to the specificity and weakness of the Act. Number 4, require a percentage of statements to be audited. Right now, I believe under the statute, it gives authority to the Secretary of State and to the Commission to undertake a detailed examination of statements. But we feel that without that requirement in the law, that may not happen. And then we want, number 5, remove the present limitation on reporting membership on boards, business interests, professional licenses, and similar associations to New Mexico only. These should be reported, we feel, wherever they occur. Number 6 and last, just for today, require specific education for all filers and provide that once the required education is completed, fines will be levied for noncompliance. We feel that then maybe people will take this seriously. So we've included a few completed statements in our materials, and I'd like to go over them with you. I'm sure the public's interested as well. Beginning on page 84 are the instructions. This is in your packet. 84 are your instructions. And if you choose not to look at it, so be it, but they are there in our packet. And you can see those instructions are scant, to say the least. And then we go to our first example financial disclosure statement. These are all pulled from the database on the Secretary of State's website. They are all a matter of public record. And we've chosen 4 today that we feel are representative examples of some of the issues with the law, some of the issues with the form, and with compliance. So the first one that I'm looking at and begins on page 85 in the packet is the statement of Senator Linda Lopez, State Senator Linda Lopez. And she's been a state senator since 1997. Although the law requires only 5 years to be kept and archived of these statements, if you go to the database right now, you can look from 2013 and beyond. And her form looks like this every year. And so just a couple of things to point out. She lists as her employer Linda M. Lopez Consulting. She is the owner. And yet when you go to Section 5, the reporting of sources of gross income over $5,000, there's nothing there, NA. And that's been consistent throughout the years. And I'm sure some of you would like to know, how can that be? I know I do. So I went down a rabbit hole yesterday of looking up what actually is gross income, what does it mean? And there's certainly a possibility that it could exclude gifts. So this is representative again. But again, I just want to say there's no indication here that there's improper reporting, but there's not enough information required by the existing law to rule that out. There's not enough information required by the filer, and by the way, many states require gifts over a certain amount to be reported on their financial disclosure statements. So we've seen Section 3, Section 5. Section 6 requires reporting individual who has a consulting operation or similar business to provide the requested information. And it requires areas of specialization, and then income or sources of income, and then by whom it's received. And again, even though there's a consulting operation listed, it says NA there on the form. But because there's no checkbox, this is a simple solution by employment that would say, does this employment generate income sufficient to be required to be reported as an income source? There's nothing like that on the form, and that's something we've suggested. We don't know if she has no clients or no income from this, or if she's simply not reporting it. So again, this is representative of many forms, just because the law is written the way it is and requires so little, we don't know whether this information is accurate or not. That's the first disclosure form. The second one is Senator Mark Moore's, and that begins on 88 in our packet, in the Commissions and Public's packet. And Senator Moore's, by the way, he did reach out after we published our 2018 report, and I met with him. He would like to be involved in the reform of the Financial Disclosure Act. But I want to point to his form because he's been a senator since 2013. And he reports that both he and his spouse are partners in PCNM. Again, we've asked that acronyms not be used so people know exactly what they're talking about. But in Section 5, when he reports income, he does report salary and investment. But the form requires him to list the name of the reporting individual or spouse who receives it. And instead, he's listed PCNM, which is the name of the business, and Charles Schwab, which is the investment firm. So again, just sort of a casualness and a laxity. Also, Section 12 requires people to list state agencies to which the reporting individual or their spouse provided goods or services. He lists Medicaid. As far as I know, that's not a state agency here in New Mexico. He could be meaning the Department of Health, we don't know. And then individual providing goods or services, it simply says healthcare services. So again, no listing of the individual who's providing those services. So again, the third statement that we put in our packet is of a candidate for the state Senate. It's Ricardo Vargas, and he fills out sections 1 through 3. He states his employer. He states that his employer is his income source. And then there's nothing in the remainder of the form. And Section 2 requires, it says right here in the instructions, if Section 4 through 14 do not apply, please indicate with not applicable. Many times people just put NA, but because there's nothing in there, we don't know if it's not applicable to him or if he just hasn't completed the form. So again, and there's no one that I'm aware of, unless the commission has begun looking at these, who looks at these besides New Mexico Ethics Watch. The fourth form that we have an example of is for Representative Harry Garcia. And I want to take you to section 8. It is a section requiring reporting of real estate. And I know I'm going through these quickly. I know these like the back of my hand, and I'm aware that many of you do not, probably most of you, but just being aware of time here, these are in the pack, but they can be looked at. In section 8, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of reporting. 12 commercial properties, a ranch, houses, lots, trailer park. We see in section 5 that there are rents reported as income, but we have no idea from which properties these rents are coming and to whom they're rented. So again, the law, he's following the law here, no doubt, but the law is not requiring information that's sufficient to let us know if there are conflicts of interest here. And that, I suppose, is why the law was enacted, to reveal conflicts of interest, maybe among other things. In section 9, there's listed where you're supposed to list other business interests over $10,000. There is listed a name of a business, Mi Casitas, manufacturing portable sheds. We go up to section 5. There's no reporting of income from this business. We don't know. There's no checkbox here that says, does this business give gross income required to be reported in section 5? We don't know that. We just don't know if it's missing. What we've also found is that people sometimes put information in this section without duplicating it or reporting it in section 5, where they are required to report income more than $5,000. So this is just a look at 4 representative forms. I do want to say that business interest is not defined in the Financial Disclosure Act. Financial interest is. So that becomes a problem as well. People don't know what that section is asking for. So we did provide a mock form to the Secretary of State, and that's in the packet. And again, you may wish to follow along, you may not, but for both the public and commissioners, that begins on page 97. And the Secretary of State, we've talked about it twice with them, agreed that our version of the form, and I'm sure there are faults with our version as well, but it does help to capture more information and provide more information to the voters and to the public. It makes it easier to understand. What we know now, we can see on the Secretary of State's website, is that all financial disclosure statements for 2021 will be required to be completed electronically. There is no form up for 2021 yet, so we'll have to wait and see what it's like. So I know I've given you a sort of an overview. I'm sure it was faster than you'd like, trying to be aware of time here. Certainly will be available for questions after Tony finishes his presentation. But here's the bottom line. New Mexico could be doing a much better job of giving citizens and voters information by which to judge candidates and public officials. So we, all of us, can gauge whether officials are acting in their own interest or the interest of citizens. How can they do a better job? How can we all do a better job? Number 1, by strengthening the law. Number 2, by providing review of statements. Number 3, requiring robust education. And number 4, penalizing non-compliers. And again, I'll pass the baton here to Tony Ortiz to talk about the Lobbying Regulation Act, and I'll be available for questions after Tony finishes today. Thank you so much for allowing us to appear today.
Thank you, Ms. Sabo. And Mr. Ortiz, in the few remaining minutes, I invite you to share your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commission members, and good morning. I'm going to be straightforward because I know you have a long day ahead of you. Kathy's already mentioned that already in 2020, New Mexico Ethics Watch has published 2 extensive reports on lobbying activities in our state. And either after this meeting or whenever it's convenient for you, I really encourage you to look at some of the conclusions and the recommendations in our reports on lobbying that took place in the cannabis industry, the film industry, regarding tax policy, and the oil and gas industry. The recommendations we want to share with you today are the result of the work that was done in those reports. I would just want to say, I think this is really important. I've worked directly for or with or around the legislature for 3 decades in my professional life. And it's critical to note that lobbyists are an integral component of our legislative system, and not only in the state of New Mexico, but on the federal level and in other jurisdictions. Most of the folks that do that work, they comply with the rules, and they are an important source of information on a range of complex issues. Having said that, and I think it's especially true during these times that we're in, with really difficult budget decisions and policy decisions that face our leaders, that we look at recommendations to increase trust in our institutions and to increase transparency in how business is done here in the state of New Mexico. So in that spirit, beginning on page 103 of your materials, you're going to find a memorandum that lays out the 4 recommendations that we want to bring to you today for proposed amendments to the Lobbyist Regulation Act. And following that memorandum is a discussion draft that we put together that we would really offer for your consideration as a legislative proposal in the 2021 legislative session. As you all well know, one of the duties of the Ethics Commission is to take a look at existing statutory provisions that are under your charge, and to develop recommendations for the consideration of legislators and the governor for changes. And one of those statutory acts is, of course, the Lobbyist Regulation Act. So to get straight to it, now I'm going to be working off of the discussion draft. The first recommendation that we put forward for your consideration is to require a 2-year moratorium for former statewide officials, former legislators, former public regulation commissioners, and former cabinet secretaries, that for a 2-year period after their public service, that they not receive compensation to work as a lobbyist in the state of New Mexico. This is very common in other jurisdictions. Most states require a 1-year or a 2-year moratorium. In the state of Florida, they recently adopted an initiative to make that a 5-year cooling off period. So that's recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 2, and this really goes to the subject of transparency. Within 2 weeks after a legislative session concludes, lobbyists or lobbyist employers would be required to file with the Secretary of State's office a report that would list all the legislation they lobbied during that legislative session, and to indicate that they indeed lobbied on specific bills and the position that they took, whether that was to support the measure, oppose the measure, or take another position with regard to that measure. So for citizens, researchers, journalists, it would be another important piece of information that would allow them to understand who is supporting what, who's opposing what, and just to add that information to the public, so for public discourse, so that people could have a clear indication of where things stand on important issues here in the state of New Mexico. Recommendation number 3, and along with the previous 2, and I think this is important also, these first 3 recommendations, legislation has been introduced in previous years. So these are measures that have been considered, debated, amended, vetted. They just haven't quite made it to the finish line. And number 3 indicates, this may surprise you, that it should be a requirement for legislators to disclose the compensation that they receive and who they receive it from for their service lobbying legislative proposals here in the state of New Mexico. And we've defined lobbying expenses to include the following. Expenditures paid by a lobbyist that are reimbursed by the lobbyist's employers, political contributions made by a lobbyist that are reimbursed by the lobbyist's employer, expenses incurred by a lobbyist, including living expenses, maintaining an office, probably most importantly, all compensation paid to a lobbyist for their work. Again, this goes to the matter of transparency and giving the citizens and the people of New Mexico a clearer indication of just how much money is being spent to move the needle on important issues here in our state. And then the final measure, and I think this probably loops back to something that Mayor Sanchez shared with you at the very beginning of this meeting. We propose that when a legislator, when a family member of a legislator is lobbying a bill that all legislators are required to vote upon, that if there's a first degree of how best to say this, a first degree of familial connection between the legislator and the lobbyist, and that would be a partner, a spouse, a sibling, a child, that a legislator be required to recuse themselves from that vote. And I think more than anything, that would address a clear perception of conflict of interest. As it stands right now, and in the memorandum, we list some of the relationships that exist at this point in time. We just feel that this would be a good government measure that would allow the citizens of New Mexico to have greater trust in their institutions and how laws are made in our state. So, Mr. Chairman, that's a very brief summary of our recommendations regarding changes to the Lobbyist Regulation Act. And I would just close by saying that at this particular point in time, I think this is a great opportunity for all citizens in our state and for you as ethics commissioners to really be in the vanguard and support measures that indeed we believe will increase trust in our important institutions. Thank you very much, and we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ortiz and Ms. Sabo. We are trying to move ahead, but I don't want to foreclose any of the commissioners from asking any questions or making any comments. So bearing that in mind, Commissioner Baker?
Very briefly, I just want to thank Mr. Ortiz and Ms. Sabo for their work, all the time and effort they've put into this, as well as their colleagues. I want to make one comment and one suggestion. The comment is former City of Albuquerque Mayor Marty Chavez said there are very few secrets that are worth keeping. And I generally agree with that comment. And then second, I wonder if it would be appropriate to investigate whether requiring elected officials and people who have to fill out these financial disclosure forms to have to submit a copy of their state and federal tax returns, plus all the schedules. That seems to me to be an easy way to identify where folks are getting their money from, how they're spending it, and that would perhaps obviate the need to fill out separate forms. Just an idea. I don't know if it's a good one or not, but I throw it on the table.
Thank you. Yeah. Commissioner Bluestone? Walker, is he unmuted?
Now I'm unmuted. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I too want to thank both of you for really excellent presentations. And the materials that you sent us are extremely thorough. I've been impressed with the reports that New Mexico Ethics Watch has done, and they're voluminous, but they're outstanding. And I really commend you for your work. I guess I'll direct comments briefly first to Kathy about the financial disclosure and then to Tony about the lobbying. I guess what surprised me the most about the financial disclosure was that the Secretary of State does not have authority to promulgate rules and regulations to implement the act. Have there been proposals to do that? Is there any opposition? What's the history behind that, Kathy?
I'm afraid I muted Kathy. I have asked her to unmute herself here, though.
I'm unmuted now. I hope Commissioner Bluestone. I have not seen any amendments that have proposed that. That was one of the first things when we met with the Secretary of State about financial disclosure. We noted that was the case, and that it tied her hands in a lot of ways to the specifics of this 1993 piece of legislation. She would love to have that that ability to promulgate rules and regulations, but it's and at one point Justice Bosson and I were even toying with the idea of saying you have that implied authority, but I don't think anybody necessarily believes it because other statutes specific, and Tony, you're the statutory expert here, other statutes specifically include that power to promulgate, and this one does not. So that's what I know about that, Commissioner Bluestone.
Well, thank you, because it seems to me that ought to be right at the top of our list in terms of legislative recommendations, and to talk to the Secretary of State's office about that as well. But even in the absence of rules and regulations authority, is it your position and the Secretary of State's position that she could do the kind of financial disclosure statement form like the model that you've proposed without anything else needing to be changed in the law?
That's our position, and it's certainly one we seem to feel she agrees with, and her staff as well. We tried with that particular form, Commissioner Bluestone, we tried to stay within the parameters of the existing statute. There are many other things we wish that we could put in there, but it just didn't seem appropriate given the statute.
Thank you. I mean, these are very important points, I think. Can I switch now to the lobbyist issues? And again, the background reports, the summary, what you did today, Tony, outstanding. And again, under the Lobbyist Regulation Act, as I understand what your report says, the Secretary of State also doesn't have rulemaking authority right now under that act.
Commissioner Bluestone and Chair and other commissioners, that's accurate. I spent a considerable amount of time looking at the Lobbyist Regulation Act, the Financial Disclosure Act, other areas where the Secretary of State has jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction is simply not accompanied by the express authority to promulgate rules and recommendations. We feel that, as you do, that's a significant gap in the law.
Okay, that seems important. Thank you again. And let me go to the discussion draft too that you went through for us, Tony, and that's also excellent. I have a few questions. In terms of the first proposal on the 2-year cooling off period, I see that the penalty that's proposed is a misdemeanor for the violation of that. Did you consider also proposing any kind of a civil penalty or any disgorgement of any monies earned in violation of the provision, and even allowing the AG, the State Ethics Commission, and maybe even private enforcement to add that as an alternative enforcement mechanism?
Commissioner Bluestone, I did consider all those alternatives. I think that's an important policy debate as to what the sanction might be. I landed on the misdemeanor simply because the most recent legislative proposal to take this up, which I believe was 2017, At that time, that proposal called for the use of a misdemeanor as a sanction, but certainly not wedded to that. There are many different ways you could go to place a sanction.
And on your section 2, on the post-session report on lobbying, what are your thoughts about a pre-session statement of interests and intent?
I don't see anything to Commissioner Bluestone. I don't see anything to preclude that. One of the things I was trying to keep in mind as I was putting this together was to strike a balance between seeking transparency through common sense requests for information, and also trying not to be too onerous as far as the request for information. So I'm certainly open. We're certainly open to other suggestions. This discussion draft is very much a baseline document to get an important discussion going. So I really appreciate your thoughts about a pre-session report as well.
Okay, thank you. On your third section on the annual lobbying expense reports and the hot button issue of requiring lobbyists to report how much money they got paid, what do you think about a possible range of reports, like the range of income of greater than $5,000? I mean, if we had less than 5,000, between 5 and 10, 10 and 50, 50 and 100, or over 100. I mean, are there any states that do things like that, or what's the range of experience that you've seen in other states and jurisdictions or the feds, and what you think might make the most sense as a possible alternative to just the exact amount being disclosed?
Chairman Bluestone, you're accurate. Jurisdictions do this in a variety of different ways. Some do include a range of reporting. I think that may be a very common sense way to go forward here. I have to say, though, that when I first dove into this and realized that there's no current requirement to disclose compensation in the state of New Mexico, I think that sets us apart from a lot of other states in a not attractive way. It's so important for the citizens of New Mexico to know who the folks are who are really in the front ranks of influencing important policy decisions in our state, and how much they're being paid, and how much money is being dedicated to opposing, supporting these important issues. So however it comes about, whether it's the range as you described, or the information that we've called for in this discussion draft, I think those are all great discussions to have at the 2021 legislative session.
And I also want to commend you on your introductory comments about the importance of lobbyists. I mean, this is not just that lobbyists are all evil and need to be castigated. Lobbyists play a very important critical role in information gathering and presentation on important public policy issues. But what you're talking about is just providing fair notice to the public about important facts, so that the public can know that the public interest is being served and not just private interest. My final question is on your proposal to require recusal of a legislator whose family member is lobbying on a matter. Recusal, I know, is an option right now, although, as you say and you point out in your report, it's rarely used. What do you think about, at least as an alternative, a minimum requirement for disclosure, either by the lobbyist or by the legislator, or both? And maybe the filing of a statement, or a statement on the floor before each vote, or in committee before each vote, that I intend to vote on this, but I want to disclose that my spouse is lobbying for this position on this bill. And I'm just wondering if, short of the extreme of recusal, which of course denies their constituents then a voice in the voting process, if we should be seriously considering some kind of alternative that requires full and fair disclosure at appropriate times so that the public knows about these issues.
Commissioner Bluestone, as always, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and that strikes me as a really good possible alternative when it comes to these familial relationships. What we're striving for here is just to increase transparency. If there were a disclosure that indeed I'm going to vote on this, but I want everybody to know that my son is lobbying this measure quite vigorously, I think that provides the citizens of New Mexico with important information that they should possess.
Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you very much for an excellent report, and look forward again to going through your documents in more detail, but I've been very impressed with what I've seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bluestone. Commissioner Carruthers?
Kathy and Tony, real good work on this. There's clearly a lot of work to be done. I think in particular, a financial reporting form should be perfected, and we should adopt it in New Mexico. And I'm not sure of the legal platform that you have to do that, but I think that would be a good first step. And I'll just briefly on lobbying, Tony, I think you put preaching and started meddling here with your recommendations. These are pretty stout recommendations. I would only have an additional recommendation, and I think Stuart pointed out a number of important features. I used to be a federal official, an appointed federal official with the Department of the Interior, and I recall vividly the kinds of prohibitions that were placed upon me after I left that job, and it was kind of levels of prohibitions, and there were certain things I could never lobby on. If I was a principal person in trying to affect that policy, then I had a lifetime prohibition from ever lobbying on that issue. But then there was another tier that said, if you were around it and you knew about it or whatever, you had a 1 or 2 year or 3 year. But there were steps, and I think the federal government has gone through this several times. And I guess one of the recommendations is you might take a look at how they've been able to kind of mix and match a little bit to make it possible to leave public service and be a lobbyist. And by the way, I think there was some prohibition, it's been so long ago, there was some prohibition for me lobbying initially. Maybe there was a year or so that I had to set up. But I thought the Department of Interior Policy, I guess it was the Department of Interior Policy, made a lot of good sense and did preclude people. I do remember that one exemption was anything that you had done with Native Americans, you could lobby on. There were no restrictions on that. I do remember that from the Department of Interior regs. But give it a look. There may be kind of a way you can step this down so that people, there are just certain things. If you pass the Tax Act, that you were the principal author of the Tax Act in New Mexico, you might have a lifetime prohibition from lobbying on that particular thing. It's just a thought, because I went through it at the federal level, and I thought it was fair to me, and thought it was fair to the government.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Governor. Commissioner Solomon? Walker, is he unmuted?
Unmuted now.
He is unmuted, yeah.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kathleen and Tony, for this outstanding work that you did. I'm sure that just as other commissioners have stated, we all appreciate this tremendous amount of work that you put into this. I just have, I think Stuart covered a lot of ground that I was looking at similarly, but more specifically, of course, he's right on top of this stuff. But I wanted to just, in talking about, the two acts being ripe for reform, Kathy, I was wondering, do we have any legislators that are willing to carry this forward now? Because this is a lot of good work. Are there people that have been approached on this, or how does it stand in terms of the legislative process?
And thank you, Commissioner Solomon. As I mentioned, Senator Mark Moores, whose statement we looked at today, did come forward after our most recent Financial Disclosure Act report in 2018 and expressed his desire to work on reform. We have not taken the time to put together any kind of a coalition, but I think we could probably expect there would be bipartisan support for something on the Financial Disclosure Act, given that Senator Moores is a Republican, and I think we could easily get a Democrat in the House or the Senate to also step up and support this reform as well.
Okay, and then Tony, in looking at the differences in the way that which this moratorium is resolved in different states, I was wondering what the legislative history revealed to you in terms of those that move forward with the 5-year moratorium.
Commissioner Solomon, that was in the state of Florida, and my recommendation is that that was actually done by a ballot initiative. That was not a legislative enactment. And I'm not aware, and I'm not familiar with the history behind that ballot initiative.
So that was only one state then that you're referring to, Florida?
That's correct, and that's the longest period of time, at least on the state level, for a cooling off period or a moratorium.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Solomon. Commissioner Villanueva?
I want to thank you both. I don't have any specific questions, but I do have a general comment. I would like to thank you both for an excellent presentation, and I want to thank you for your steadfast participation and involvement in the commission since our inception. I do find merit in a number of the recommendations that you have made. There's much to ponder, and I am happy to take those into consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Williams?
Well, I'd like to reiterate what everybody else has said. I thought your presentations were outstanding, and I even got to follow most of it. And I agree with what you have proposed. As far as lobbyists are concerned, I have, I guess, a question. Should we know the names of the lobbyists who are lobbying for certain things that they want? Is that allowed? Would we be able to know? And I'm asking this question only because of the recent case we had regarding the PRC. And I didn't understand who, I knew there was an organization lobbying for this change, but I didn't know who the lobbyist was, the name of the lobbyist, and therefore what his connection was with this particular issue that got on the ballot. Can someone answer that for me?
I'll take a shot at that, Commissioner Williams. I believe our second recommendation is intended to move in that direction that you just mentioned, and that would be that the lobbyists be required to file a report with the Secretary of State's office to indicate the measures that they worked on and whether they supported that measure or opposed it.
I have another question with regard to lobbying and holding, being in a position in the government and then leaving it. I had an incident. I served on the Mortgage Finance Authority, and there was a high-level government official that was in the housing area. When he left, he immediately got a position to direct a large housing function with significant pay. Would that be something that would be a violation? I mean, he was a government, a state government officer, then left, and just a few months later, he was given a position for a housing development and with a significant amount of money. Would that be a violation?
Commissioner Williams, under current law in the state, I don't believe that would be a violation. That's a little different than what we're proposing here today, but I do appreciate your comment in that the perception alone is not something that increases trust in our government.
And then, as far as the other issue with regard to these violations, I liked your form. Now, who would present that, or who could approve that form? Would it be the Secretary of State, or would it have to be approved by the legislature, etc.? Who would be responsible for getting this form approved?
And it's my understanding, Commissioner Williams, that the secretary could approve it as long as it's within the parameters of the existing statute. As I mentioned, we went before them twice and talked about it, and they're just understaffed and underfunded. I understand that, and they're now tackling an election that's historic and not seen in 100 years, trying to handle this election. So they've asked us to be patient, and we have been. And now we did talk to them before, while they were working on this new form that will come out electronically. So fingers crossed that this new form will be more in line with the mock form, not because it's from us, but because it gives voters and citizens more information and is easier to understand for filers. So we'll have to see what that electronic form looks like when it's available.
I was appalled as to how some of these forms were filled out. And for example, with the one with Senator Linda Lopez, am I to assume she didn't have a spouse? I mean, she put NA, NA, NA. And of course, I thought it was very poorly filled out. So with that, can't somebody say or send it back to them and say, this is not appropriate? You need to fill this out as required? Is there someone to do some quality control over those financial disclosures?
Commissioner Williams, I don't think there is, other than when it's a campaign season and someone starts to look at them, or Ethics Watch or another group looks at them. And it's a shame, because before the system, while the system hasn't been electronic, some appear on the database and they're totally illegible. Simply because of copying mistakes, and a lot of times because of handwriting. And that's something we've taken up with them, and they just say they don't have the personnel. If this was important to people, they would have the personnel. And that's what I'll say.
And for those who did not file a financial disclosure, as you had pointed out in your report, did somebody go back to them and say, you are required to fill this out, please do it?
Well, again, Commissioner Williams, we have requested to be made aware when those forms are accessible. So we're certainly hoping that's what's going on. As you know, as I mentioned, 2 people have reached out and said, look, here are our forms. We filed them with the county clerk. So then the question becomes, did the county clerk not transmit them, or did they get misfiled or mislabeled, or just not put in the database? So hopefully there's work going on behind the scenes, and we'll be checking up on that after the 10-day period.
All I could say is you did a wonderful job. I was so impressed, and good luck. God bless you for your work. We need people like you. Keep trucking.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. And to echo the sentiments yet again of my colleagues, thank you very much, Ms. Sabo, Mr. Ortiz. I would invite you that the law, and direct you to the fact that the law does permit New Mexico Ethics Watch to file complaints with this commission. So in whatever specific instances you may find appropriate. So with that, I thank you both for your time and for your continued diligence and support of the job that we are all trying to do. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let us now, Walker, I will let you do what it is you're doing, and move into item number 6 on the agenda, which is advisory opinion number 2020-007. And it is your stage, Mr. Boyd.
Thank you,
Chair and commissioners and members of the public. I'm going to try and be brief. I know that there have been repeated references to the busy agenda we have today. This advisory opinion fits within a pattern. The commission staff and the commission have been asked on a number of occasions to address procurement code issues. And this one goes to a very specific and kind of specialized area of state procurement, which is the purchasing under the State Use Act. And specifically, the opinion addresses whether there is some provision of law that prohibits members of the New Mexico Council for purchasing from persons with disabilities, that's a mouthful, from voting to award contracts to themselves or businesses they own. And the proposed opinion, which I took the laboring oar on along with Commissioner Bluestone, with some great feedback from Commissioner Bluestone, basically answers the question that no, council members who aren't employed by the state don't have any kind of affirmative duty or legal consequence that attaches if they vote to award themselves contracts pursuant to the State Use Act. And that really flows from two facts. As I mentioned earlier, these council members are not employed by the state. They do not receive compensation for their service on the council. And as a result, because they do not receive compensation in any way, the Governmental Conduct Act does not apply to them. So ordinarily, the Governmental Conduct Act would prohibit Jeremy or myself from awarding a contract between the commission and either ourselves or a business we own. And that the reason that is the case is because Jeremy and I receive compensation from the state. But because council members are prohibited from receiving any compensation, even per diem reimbursements, the Governmental Conduct Act does not apply and therefore would not prohibit them from voting to award State Use Act contracts to themselves or to businesses they own. And second, and this is kind of where I provide a little by way of explanation of what the State Use Act is the procurement code also does not apply to State Use Act contracts. And the reason that is the case is because the State Use Act is designed to create a preference for businesses that employ individuals who are disabled. And so the State Use Act is basically the considered and I think correct judgment of the legislature that otherwise contracts that might not otherwise be the lowest price or the most advantageous to the state may nonetheless be appropriate to the extent that they result in employment and meaningful employment opportunities for New Mexicans who are disabled. And so that I think the legislature may not have intended this, but as a result of exempting these contracts from the requirements of the procurement code, the procurement code's conflict of interest provisions also do not apply to State Use Act. To council members who are not employed by the state. And so the second part of the opinion kind of goes and provides a set of recommendations for what interested members of the council might do to try and fix this issue. And there are a series of recommendations there. First and foremost, and I have to thank Commissioner Bluestone for this, members of the council who aren't conflicted can just refuse to vote on a contract that involves someone on the council receiving, either them or their business receiving this contract. So they would, in effect, be boycotting the contract and preventing the contract from being awarded in the event they knew that the contract was going to go to a non-state employed council member. Then there are a series of rule-based recommendations and then potential recommendations to change the statutes at issue here. And I won't go into those. I'm going to presume that the members of the commission have already read the draft opinion, and I'll stand for any questions there. But I wanted to offer this sort of explanation to members of the public who may be interested. And yes, I'll be asking for a vote to adopt and issue the draft's advisory opinion included in your materials as 2020-007. Thank you.
Commissioner Baker,
I have no questions.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Walker. I think you did an excellent job on this, and I appreciated your openness in working it through, you and Jeremy together with me. We don't identify who the requester is, and I don't know who the requester is, but I do want to point out that I think this raises a serious ethical issue, and I just want to read for the benefit of the public the first paragraph in the analysis, where we state, quote, "We appreciate the diligence and ethical concerns expressed by the requester in bringing this matter to our attention. We also agree with their expression that when self-dealing like that described occurs, quote, professionalism is compromised, end quote. And when that occurs, in our judgment, public confidence in the ethical operation of government suffers. We are nevertheless constrained by the laws under which we operate, only to determine if a law currently in effect has been violated, not whether we believe every action we may be asked about is ethical, end quote. And I think the way you describe the options that we lay out in the opinion, the recommendations we make, I think we're taking seriously and acting responsibly to the requester's legitimate concerns, but we are constrained and can only operate within the law as it exists, and those non-public members are not bound by the Governmental Conduct Act as you described, as public members are. And I just think this is an important opinion, and I think you've done a thorough job, and I just want to thank you, and I'm happy to make a motion at any appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, to adopt this advisory opinion 2020-07.
Thank you, Stuart. Commissioner Carruthers.
No, I like the briefing very much. Recommendations, if somebody wants to go to the legislature to change it, might be a little more specific about what needs to be changed. But other than that, I think you've done the best you can under the laws as you read them. And so just if you have some specific recommendations on the legal language that might correct this, then I think it ought to be offered in the brief or later on.
Thank you, Governor. Commissioner Solomon.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva.
I just want to say that I think it's another very well-written advisory opinion. No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams.
Yes, I do have some questions. This organization, the New Mexico Council for Purchasing from Persons with Disabilities, is that an organization that would have to develop an ethics code if they didn't accept ours?
Chair and Commissioner Williams, under the Governmental Conduct Act, each state agency is required to adopt a code of ethics that would apply to its employees. But as the opinion mentions, the council members at issue here are not employed by the state. They are not. They do not receive any compensation. And so even if this council adopted a code of ethics, whether a minimum one and just in line with the Governmental Conduct Act or the code of ethics proposed by the State Ethics Commission, it likely would not apply to the non-employed, non-compensated members of the council. So I'm free to stand for any correction if Director Ferris disagrees with me on that, but that's my initial take.
So if they did write their own ethics code, could they put something in there regarding those who are not paid, that there's also the issue of a conflict of interest if they vote on something?
Chair and Commissioner Williams, that's covered in the advisory opinion. We one of the potential fixes here is for the council to adopt rules that would prohibit non-compensated, non-employed members from participating in decisions to award contracts to themselves or to companies that they hold an ownership interest in. But as the opinion points out, that requires a level of diligence before the fact that even if there's no corrupt intent there, it may be hard for other council members to know whether a contract is going to involve a business in which one of the non-compensated, non-employed council members has an interest.
And then on page 12, I was wondering, it says that this organization, Horizons of New Mexico, however, uses the same federal tax identification name as WorkQuest, a Texas-based 501c3 nonprofit. Is there some conflict or significance with that?
Chair and Commissioner Williams, I don't think there's any special significance to that when it comes to this advisory opinion. And I think the footnote is there to just provide some background to the reader about what Horizons of New Mexico is. And at least in our, based on the information that we had, it was unclear what role that nonprofit has in actually approving contracts. We did know that the council kind of sits as a body and approves contracts between state agencies and businesses who are eligible under the State Use Act to obtain these contracts. But we weren't clear whether Horizons of New Mexico is its own domestic nonprofit or whether it's a sort of DBA for this Texas entity, which may be perfectly proper under the law. There's no intent there to say that there's any conflict of interest in having a Texas nonprofit perform this work.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to compliment you on this advisory opinion. Thank you for your good work, and I really appreciate it. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. There being no other questions, is there a motion to issue the advisory opinion as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair votes yes as well. Now we'll move on to item number 7. Thank you, Walker. That was really well done. And Jeremy, I think it's yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'll present the second in the pair of procurement code advisory opinions that's up for the Commission's consideration today. This advisory opinion, like one previous advisory opinion, regards a procurement matter at the local school board level. And while the Commission does not have the authority to receive requests for advisory opinions about the procurement code from members of local public school boards or the employees of those school districts, this advisory opinion is being offered based on a request from someone over whom the Commission does have jurisdiction and does have the authority to request an advisory opinion. So I wanted to say that first. The substance of the advisory opinion, it responds to the question where a school district has awarded contracts for legal services to 3 law firms based on an RFP process, a competitive sealed process. Does the procurement code allow that school district to procure legal services in excess of $40,000 from a law firm that was not awarded a contract through the school district's RFP process? And the answer to that question in the advisory opinion is yes. The procurement code allows a school district to procure legal services, which are a species of professional services, without going through RFP, so long as the total contract amount does not exceed $60,000, which is the limit that state law, the procurement code, sets on small purchase professional service contracts, exclusive of applicable GRT, and so long as the procurement accords with the local professional service procurement rules that the school district central purchasing office promulgated. So the procurement code authorizes the central purchasing offices of local public bodies, including school districts, to promulgate professional service procurement rules for the procurement of professional services, in addition to the legal regime that the procurement code establishes. And under this school district's particular rules, the school district allows for procurements in excess of $40,000 for professional services, so long as they're approved by the board. And that seems to have occurred in this case. And the advisory opinion offers that by way of explaining how the hypothetical facts that were in the request would apply, but the advisory opinion also states that technically the State Ethics Commission doesn't have the authority to interpret local procurement rules, only the sections of the procurement code. And so, hewing a little closer to the procurement code, the main issue here is that local public bodies can procure professional services without going to RFP, so long as the professional services don't exceed $60,000, inclusive of applicable GRT. And with one important caveat, that the $60,000 limit can't be skirted by artificially dividing one contract into several contracts, which in the aggregate would exceed $60,000. That's the substance of the analysis of this opinion. I will note that I have received communication from the buyer at this particular school district about this issue. I've also spoken to the acting superintendent about this particular procurement that's occurring in this particular school board. And they are both aware that of the $60,000 limit that's set by the procurement code. And moreover, they're also aware that under the procurement code, the State Ethics Commission has the power to enforce through civil fines the provisions of the procurement code. And both the acting superintendent and the buyer have been asked to inform the commission if in fact the local school board approves or executes a contract in excess of $60,000 in violation of the procurement code without having gone to RFP. And with that, Chair and Commissioners, I'm happy to address any questions.
Perfect timing. Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
I don't have a question, but just as a matter of disclosure, my law firm recently was hired by Lee County on one project, and recently we were hired by the city of Las Vegas on one contract to provide legal services. Lee County has a county attorney, Las Vegas has a city attorney. I do not know if they go out for professional service proposals, but to the extent that our contracts are for less than $60,000, this particular opinion would affect us. I don't think I have a conflict, but I just want everyone to know that that's a situation that my firm finds itself in.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bluestone?
No questions, but I do thank Commissioner Baker for his disclosure.
Commissioner Carruthers?
No comments or questions.
Commissioner Solomon?
No comments or questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Villanueva?
None, thank you.
Commissioner Williams?
I have a question. As I understood this person had a contract for $10,000, and then every so often it was increased for his services without going through some competition. However, it says in the facts that the school district initiated a request for proposals to establish professional service contract for legal issues. And then they awarded 3 firms, firm A, B, and C, some contracts. D is the contract in question, where the guy keeps getting his contract increased. Was firm A, B, and C, were they awarded, they said professional services or legal services? Does anybody know what those services were? I was just curious.
Chair and Commissioner Williams, as far as I know from the facts presented from the request made by the person that has authority to request this opinion, firms A, B, and C went through an RFP for the procurement of legal professional services. That these firms were in fact law firms.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion and a second to approve the issuance of the advisory opinion 2020-08?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone? Commissioner Bluestone?
You may have
Yes.
lost. Oh, he's here. Okay.
Got him. Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
And chair votes yes also, passes unanimously. Thank you for the good work as usual, both of you guys. All right, Jeremy, do we need to do any sort of special motion to move into the beginning of the public rule hearing?
No, Chair, we can move directly in there. It might be an appropriate time to see if anyone needs to take a break.
Yeah, I was going to do that, but I thought I'd move that first.
Okay.
We need to take a break. Everybody's kind of on their own now, but that signals to me that Jeremy himself needs to do that. So why don't we go ahead and take 5, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, is everybody back? I don't
Like
see
we're waiting
commi-
for Commissioners Baker, Villanueva, and Williams.
I don't see Commissioner Williams.
I'm slow. Excuse me.
There she is. Oh, you just weren't in frame, but there you are.
And Commissioner Solomon here too. So it looks like we're ready to proceed. Oh, no, we're just waiting for Commissioner Baker. I apologize.
Yeah, I don't see Jeff.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
are you sporting a new hairdo?
No, ma'am.
Oh,
I did bathe today, however.
well, you look dapper.
Well, thank you very much. And you always look as exemplary as anyone could be.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. Hey, Jeremy or Walker, do you have a cell number for Jeff to see if we should move on or?
Text him.
Yeah, I don't have one for him for some odd reason.
And I guess I guess we can maybe get some housekeeping matters out of the way. Folks who are participating via Zoom, we're about to have a public rule hearing where people can submit comments. Because of the number of participants, I would ask that you, if you want to make a public comment, that you send me a text in the chat window for the Zoom application. And that way I can just go through anyone who's expressed interest in making a public comment. We don't have to do a kind of roll call of all the different participants. I think that's the more sensible approach for today's hearing.
It would seem. There he is. Okay. Welcome back, Commissioner Baker. I know that you weren't off watching baseball because some teams aren't playing, but
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
you're welcome. All right. Gents, Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, Commission. Now that we've entered the public rule hearing on the Commission's amendments to 1.8.1 in MAC and the proposed 1.8.4 in MAC, the first thing that needs doing is submission of the written public comments that the Commission has received into the rulemaking record. Chair, the commission has received 4 written public comments, all of which were introduced and presented on at the last, well, the commission meeting previously that dealt with these rules. They were from Common Cause, New Mexico Ethics Watch, New Mexicans for Ethics, and Somos en Pueblo Unido. Those 4 public comments have all been posted to the website since that prior meeting, and have been exhibit stamped for preparation for the rulemaking record. And as the hearing officer, I'd only ask that you admit those 4 comments into the rulemaking record. I suppose because we're doing this virtually, we signal that they are admitted.
They are admitted.
Okay, thank you. Next, the next item that needs admission into the rulemaking record is the commission's substitute for the 1.8.1 and the proposed 1.8.4. Since the last public comment period on these rules, the commissioners, and in particular Commissioners Bluestone, Villanueva, and Williams, have worked with commission staff on language both for 1.8.1 and proposed 1.8.4. That substitute document was part of the open meeting materials for today. The changes as compared to the rules that were initially issued are indicated in red text and in strike through. And I'd also ask that the chair enter this proposed set of rules into the rulemaking record.
Yes, the edited, and that they are admitted.
Okay, thank you. And with that, Chair, I think we're ready for any other public comments that any member of the public or group might wish to make at this time regarding the rules, including the new material that's now been entered into the rulemaking record.
Thank you. And Walker, you're kind of the traffic cop on this deal, so I'll let you run this.
Yes, I have only received a message from Gabriela Ibanez Guzman. I'm asking her to unmute herself now and start her video if she likes. Ms. Guzman, please feel free to comment. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good
Thank
morning.
you for the opportunity. I previously presented at the August meeting, but that seems like it was so long ago, so I thought I would make just an abbreviated presentation just to remind the Commissioners about our proposal. So essentially, our proposal seeks to create uniformity across state government when it comes to protecting New Mexicans' sensitive personal information, which we have left broadly defined within our proposal, so that way state agencies can tailor the language to fit their needs. We are endeavoring to do this because within the Governmental Conduct Act, there really isn't any language that prevents disclosure when it's not for private gain. Right now, there is a real hodgepodge of privacy policies across state government. Some departments have very strong policy protections, and other state agencies have absolutely none. So there's clearly a need for some straightforward, clear guidelines. So a policy directive is a very good first step, and we are undertaking some conversations with certain departments, specifically MVD, in an effort to fortify some of their privacy protections, but having something within the Governmental Conduct Act, which is another effort that we are undertaking, would be good public policy in terms of protecting people's sensitive personal information. One point of clarification following the presentation in August, especially around the conversation on IPRA. And so while IPRA governs disclosure when it comes to documents, IPRA is not a privacy protection law. nor does it prevent disclosure of sensitive personal information by state employees, which is the goal of our proposal. Our proposal would cover disclosure of sensitive personal information that is often disclosed in, not within documents, but in various ways, whether it's over the telephone, if you were having a conversation with a clerk, within a state agency, if a New Mexican is filling out an application and has to provide some of the sensitive personal information that we seek to protect. And that can run the gamut from obviously your name, address, social security number, whether you use an ITIN, and other personal sensitive information. And that is my presentation, but I am able to answer any questions or clarifications if there is any. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you, ma'am. Commissioners, rather than roll call it here, does anyone have any questions they would like to ask of this, of Ms. Ibanez Guzman?
I do.
Go ahead. Sir.
Yeah, I don't know if, Gabrielle, if you've seen the proposed revised 1.8.4 with the definition of sensitive personal information and the prohibition of disclosing that in 1.8.4.13. Have you had a chance to see that yet?
No, I have not.
Okay, well, I guess I would like to, that's a matter of public record that's been distributed. Is that right, Walker?
That's correct.
If
It's on
there's
the
a,
website. It's on the website in today's meeting materials for download.
okay. Well, if you get a chance to look at that and care to weigh in, I guess it has to be done during the meeting. Is that right, Walker, if we're going to adopt the rules today?
That's correct. I suppose that we could defer Ms. Guzman's comments to later on if she needs a chance to review those revisions.
I'd appreciate giving her that opportunity if that'd be okay with everybody.
Sure.
That's fine.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bluestone, can you point me in the direction of the page number?
I'm sending you a link to the PDF right now, and I'll tell you the page number.
Yes, I have the PDF open.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Page 26, Gabby.
Thank you, Director.
And then there's a definition too. I don't know if that's on page 26 or earlier.
That's on page 26.
Okay, and then the actual prohibition is on a later page. It's 1.8.4.13.
Right, so it'd be on page 31.
Okay. Yeah, we can defer her comments till later. That's fine. Anybody else, Walker?
I do not see, no one has sent me a message in the chat. If anyone wants to send me a message in the chat or raise their hand now, that would be great. That's how we're going to signal if that you want to make public comment. So we take your time or I think finish. I think Ms. Guzman is the only one who stepped forward.
Okay. All right. Why don't we go ahead with the with item number 8?
Yeah, we're on item number 8.
Yeah, we're on that. Yeah, we can't really. I guess
I'm sorry, we were on. I missed my check. Okay, so we're just we kind of need to wait then, right?
Yes, sir.
I think.
Yeah. Sorry for slowing things down a little bit here.
No. That's
Chair
fine.
and commissioners, I suppose it's worth pointing out while Ms. Ibanez Guzman is looking at the material, the new material, which as Walker said is and has been available on the transparency page of the website since the meeting materials were posted. It includes new material related to sensitive personal information and the disclosure thereof. A new rule that relates to nepotism, a new rule that relates to sexual harassment, and a new rule that relates to substance abuse, a new rule that relates to enforcement and interpretation of the code, and finally, some other smaller substantive provisions that are scattered throughout, perhaps the most important of which makes reference to the Hatch Act for those state employees whose salary is completely paid either directly or indirectly through a federal grant.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a procedural question?
Yes, sir.
As we go through these, is it your intention to take each section and then ask for comments on that section rather than going through the whole thing and having each commissioner give his or her comments? Do you want to just do it section at a time?
I'm going to defer to Jeremy on that since he's kind of got it figured out in his mind the best way, and they're doing the presenting. So, Jeremy, Walker, what do you guys prefer?
Chair and Commissioner Bluestone, after public comment, I think that the order ought to go first, if the commission chooses to adopt the amendments to 1.81 as a commission substitute, and then work from there. And after the commission's done with the amendments to 1.81, then to adopt the proposed changes to 1.8.4 as a commission substitute, and then work off of the commission substitute for any changes that the commission might have. And I think that it'd be cleanest, Chair and Commissioner Bluestone, to go commissioner by commissioner if there's specific edits or amendments to the commission substitutes.
So as it's broken out in 9 and 10, we'll just do it that way. You okay with that, everybody?
Well, it just seems to me it'd be more efficient to go through each part rather than having each commissioner go through all their comments one at a time. I think it would be a more efficient use to take like 1.8.1.9 and just take everybody's comments on that and then go on to the next section.
Yeah, I have no. Go ahead, somebody. Somebody else was about to say something.
If Jeremy's saying his microphone is not working or something like that, but
Walker, can you not hear me?
There you go. You're back on now.
Chair and Commissioner Bluestone, that it would be fine to go section by section, however the commission prefers.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. If anybody else has a preference either way, otherwise, Stuart, that's fine.
Okay, and by adopting the commission substitute, as Jeremy's recommending, we're just adopting it for the presentation, and then we can still make the changes to each particular section as we go.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You bet. Walker, you want to check on the status of our guests and her comments?
Yeah, Ms. Guzman, are you prepared to, have you had a chance to review the revisions?
Chair, commissioners, I have. It looks fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, ma'am, and thank you for your quick response. Okay. All right. That's the end of the comment section. Let's now go move into section 9, or item number 9. I'm sorry, Jeremy.
Chair, the staff would ask for a motion to adopt the commission substitute for 1.8.1 in MAC for the purposes of the further revisions.
Thank you. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. And Commissioner Baker?
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I'm having some difficulty with respect to sensitive personal information. 1.8.413 says you cannot disclose it. And then earlier, sensitive personal information is defined. And it is defined so broadly as to be meaningless.
Chair and Commissioner Baker, we're not on 1.8.4 at the moment. We're on 1.8.1.
All right, I apologize.
And that's okay. And we're simply trying to adopt for discussion. That's what we're doing.
All right.
All right.
I apologize.
So are you in favor of the motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon.
I've asked Commissioner Solomon to unmute himself here.
Commissioner
Yes,
Solomon.
sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva.
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Commissioner, the chair votes yes as well. Okay. Jeremy, you want to open it up for
Sure,
individual?
Chair, and going on Commissioner Bluestone's suggestions, I guess it does, if there are any proposed changes to any part of 1.8.1, I suppose starting with 1.8.11 through 1.8.1.9, which is the advisory opinions provision.
Commissioner Baker.
No questions.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The proposed reg says that when, as the statute does, that when we get a request for an advisory opinion, we have to issue it within 60 days unless we provide notice that we require more than 60 days. But the reg goes beyond the statute and says that even though the statute says we can advise the requester every 30 days after the initial 60-day period, the reg goes beyond that and puts an absolute outside maximum time of the commission having to issue the advisory opinion within 120 days. And I'm a little concerned. I think it's well-intentioned to provide that we don't just have open-ended requests that never get responded to, but under the statute, we do have to provide an update every 30 days if we don't issue the opinion within 60 days. And I'm just concerned that there could be circumstances where we need additional information and we're acting diligently and in good faith to gather that information, but we just don't have it. And we're continuing to get it. We're continuing to report every 30 days. And we're here imposing an arbitrary limit of 120 days as the outside maximum. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think it may be well-intentioned, but I think it imposes a limit on us that the law doesn't impose and doesn't allow for the unforeseen, unintended consequences of trying to get additional information, acting in good faith, and continuing to issue the opinion. So I guess I am actually in a position where I would recommend we delete that paragraph 4 under subsection A in 1.8.9 and just leave it as the statute says, that we should issue the opinions within 60 days. And if we can't issue it within 60 days, that we notify the requester every 30 days thereafter, and just leave it the same way as the statute is and not put in this mandatory 120-day maximum. But I'm open for advice about that, of course.
Sure. Jeremy?
Well, two things, Chair and Commissioner Bluestone. The first is, I'm not certain that that 1.8.19A4 requires the commission to issue every advisory opinion within 120 days of receipt. And I'm not sure that you were suggesting that that's how you're interpreting it. This rule provision would impose a requirement that the commission, if it is to issue an advisory opinion at all, that it must do so within 120 days of receipt. So that's the first point of clarification, that it's conditional. If the commission is to issue an advisory opinion, that needs to be done 120 days of receipt. And then second, Chair and Commissioner Bluestone, this particular rule provision was worked on in conjunction with Commissioner Villanueva, so perhaps she might have some comments in regard to this this rule provision as well.
Okay, and with the rest of the commissioners' permission, Commissioner Villanueva, we'll go ahead while it's ripe if you would care to jump in.
I don't have any objection to deleting it. Just want to remark that the 120 days is actually 4 months.
Thank you. Okay.
Not
Commissioner-
3.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Jeremy, Commissioner Villanueva. Yeah, I think that it's better to just leave it the way the statute has it and to delete that paragraph 4. And we'll just have to report every 30 days after the 60 days if we don't issue it within 60 days. But I do think this arbitrarily limits us to that 120-day maximum. And I don't think we should be imposing that arbitrary limit on us beyond what the statute requires.
Thank you. Commissioner Carruthers?
I have no comments other than on this particular point. I think speed is of the essence. When we deal with the public and representing the public, drawing out any kind of decision, the longer you draw it out, the less important it becomes to people who are waiting for an answer. So I don't mind the 120 days, but maybe the 30-day reporting after will get the job done. But let's be of the mind that people are asking questions that they want answers to as quickly as they possibly can on issues that they seem to think are important to the ethical operation of government.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon?
Say leave it as is, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva?
I want to make a correction to my statement. Based on the definition of days, that is 6 months. And I think people who read this rule should be aware that there is a statutory limit or requirement, and if we delete the 120-day definition here as it's written, then perhaps we should allude to the statute itself. So I can go either way, but I think people who read this should know that there is a statutory limit rather than being alerted every 30 days to whatever period of time that they might be expecting an advisory opinion.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams?
No comment.
Thank you. Okay, so are there anybody else have any comments on 181(1) through 9? I guess it's to you, Governor Carruthers.
No comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon, anything else on any of these?
No comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva?
None other, thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Williams?
No comment.
Okay. All right. So I guess there have been a couple of suggestions with respect to 1819A4. Stuart, are you moving to have that deleted? Stricken is probably the more appropriate word.
I am, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I don't think this is a major issue to, die on your sword for, but I do think that we should just follow the statute. And I think the rest of the reg follows the statute. And I think that this goes beyond what the statute requires and hamstrings us unnecessarily. And I agree completely with the governor that the whole idea of doing these advisory opinions is to do them promptly. I think every one that we've done so far, we've done promptly, and I expect that we will continue to do them promptly. And I think we'll do them within 60 days, as the statute requires. But I just don't think it serves our purpose to say that if you need additional information or you're trying to finish the advisory opinion, but for any reason you can't get it done within an arbitrary 120 days, that then you can't issue it at all. So I think the intention is fine, but I think that we're better off leaving things as they are with the statute and just deleting this paragraph 4.
All right, so there is a motion to strike the proposed subparagraph number 4. There is a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers,
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
All right, chair votes yes. So we will strike 1.8.1.9A4 from the proposed amendments. Thank you. All right. Jeremy?
Here, the final section in this amendments to Rule 1.8.1 is 1.8.115 with respect to commission meetings. And if any commissioners have any proposals with respect to this section.
Commissioner Baker, Commissioner Bluestone, Commissioner
I do.
Who just said that?
Stuart.
Sure. Okay, I'm sorry. I can hear you, but I can't see you. There you are.
Okay. I'm just concerned about the requirement in 1.8.1.15 that the meetings always have to be in person, and that you can participate by internet or Zoom like this only when it is difficult for the commissioner to attend in person. You know, we're in a changing world now with COVID, as we've all been experiencing. I think we all desire to be in person, and hopefully we will be able to have in-person meetings in not too much longer. But I think it's, particularly given the great expanses we have in New Mexico and the difficulties for folks to travel, that we should not have a requirement that we have to meet in person. And I think that we ought to just have it stated like it is, that we may attend virtually, provided that each commissioner participates and the public can see or hear him or her. And I think it's in our interest and in the public's interest to provide more flexibility for in-person meetings like we've been doing since COVID started. So I would recommend that under subsection A that we take out the last sentence in red there, that unless permitted by the section, the commission shall meet in person. And then just also change in subsection D so that the first sentence reads, an individual commissioner may attend a physical commission meeting virtually through telephone, phone, or web conference, provided that each commissioner participating by conference telephone can be identified by speaking, etc. So I think we have a preference for in-person meetings, but I don't think we ought to have an absolute requirement that we always have to meet in person, or that a commissioner should only be able to meet by telephone or by web when he or she can prove that it's difficult for them to meet in person. I think we ought to provide more flexibility for our commissioners to be able to decide that it's just more convenient for them, for whatever reason, to participate by phone or web conference. So I'm open to, of course, advice about this, and I don't know. I didn't go and check the Open Meetings Act. Maybe there is a requirement in the statute that you have to meet in person, unless you have a different arrangement made. But I think that we ought to deal with the reality of what we've been doing within COVID and acknowledge the convenience that this can provide and the ease it offers for both the public and us for participating in meetings.
And Stuart, to follow up, and I agree, and I suspect we all do, but in section C, virtual meetings are allowed with the consent of the commission chair. Commission may meet virtually via web or teleconference.
Right.
So that, I guess if you had a recalcitrant chair, that would be a problem, but otherwise all of those problems are resolved.
Except, as I say, in A, there's a requirement that the commission shall meet in person.
Right, but with the commission's chair's consent under C, the commission may meet virtually.
Right.
So that would seem to me to supersede A.
Yeah, but I just don't think you need that in A is what I'm saying. And it would provide more flexibility to just take it out. And also to take out in D, that you're only allowing an individual commissioner
I hear you.
when it is difficult for them to attend in person. And I think they ought to have more flexibility.
Yeah, my disagreement is with you is that there isn't flexibility. I think there is built in because of C, but I get your point in terms of its drafting. Anybody else want to comment on this?
I just to ask. Go ahead, Governor.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any problem with deleting unless permitted by the section. The commission shall meet in person. I think the section C and D actually take care of it. That if it's disturbing, I think the important point is what we meet.
Yeah.
And meeting in person may be more of a personal consideration than a real one in today's world.
Right.
Most businesses now are going to virtual meetings and seem to be doing all right as a result of our current condition. So I don't mind if you delete unless permitted by this section, which does permit us to do virtual meetings. The commission shall meet in person.
Okay. That's fine. Jeff, you had something? Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Jeremy, Walker, and Sonny if these virtual meetings cause them any difficulty. Is it a problem logistically to set these up?
Chair and Commissioner Baker, it's not at all.
Anybody else?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I to understand that this informal advisory opinion section is deleted entirely under 1.8.110?
Chair and Commissioner Williams, no, ma'am. The only part that was stricken with respect to advisory opinions was 1.8.1.9A.
Oh, okay. This mic shows that there's a whole, there's lines through.
Oh, I see. Again, no, ma'am. The informal advisory opinion authority of the commission has been relocated to 1.8.1.9B, and the reason for that was on Commissioner Villanueva's very sound suggestion that the advisory opinion process kind of be collated and structured under one rule.
Okay, so this is eliminated, but in another section.
It's cut and pasted.
Yeah, 1.8.1.10. Is that right? I'm asking.
Chair and Commissioner Williams, yes, I believe so. There is no longer the 1.8.110 that's stricken, and the substantive provisions have been moved
to another
one. To 1.8.1.9B.
Okay, so as just an administrative comment, then this section 1.8.115 should be renumbered.
Chair and Commissioner Williams, that's a very good point. Thank you.
Well, just okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Anybody else have any comments on 1.8.1.15?
Well, I just have another comment on E. Let's see, paragraph E of 115 is maintaining order. Is that all stricken from this as well?
I believe that underline reflects that it's new material.
Really? Okay.
Jeremy, isn't that how you've structured it?
Walker, go ahead on that.
I think that this was covered at the last meeting, and I think that this might be a typo in our in the staff circulated.
Yeah, I thought
amendments
it
here.
had been done.
I think that these were part of the original proposed rules and that were deleted.
So is it deleted here?
So E is deleted. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, my mistake. Right.
It was-
Anything else, Commissioner Williams? Anything else, Commissioner Williams?
Commissioner Williams?
No.
Okay. So I guess, Stuart, why don't you make a motion as you would have it so that I don't misstate something as I just did, okay, relative to your suggested revision.
Okay, I actually have two suggested revisions to point 15, and you may want to take them individually.
Let's do them individually.
The
Please.
first one is just to delete the new language in red at the end of subsection A, the sentence that says, unless permitted by this section, the commission shall meet in person. I would move that we just delete that.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers,
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. All right, and your second motion carries. Your
My
second
second-
proposed revision, Stuart?
My second proposed revision is just to make it clear that an individual commissioner can meet either in person or virtually as they may decide, and that they shouldn't be bound by a requirement that they can only meet virtually when it is difficult for them to attend.
So in terms of the language change, what would that motion look like?
It would be two things. It would make the sentence read initially, an individual commissioner may attend a physical commission meeting in person, add the words in person, or, and then pick up with the word virtually. So an individual commissioner may attend a physical commission meeting in person or virtually, comma, through telephone or web conference, comma, and then strike the next clause when it is difficult for the commissioner to attend the meeting in person. Strike that, and then have the sentence just continue with the proviso, so that the revised sentence would read, an individual commissioner may attend a physical commission meeting in person or virtually, comma, through telephone or web conference, comma, provided that each commissioner participating by conference telephone can be identified when speaking, and those attending may hear every person who speaks during the meeting.
All right, there's a motion that you all just heard. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers,
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva.
I might be out of order, but is there any discussion on that? Or does that come afterward?
I'm sorry, if there is, I thought we had discussed it pretty thoroughly, but apparently not. But I'm happy, go ahead.
May I make a suggestion? If we're going to make that change with which I'm in agreement with, perhaps we should strike the word virtual attendance and just name it attendance by individual commissioners.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I consider that a friendly amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Judy, good catch. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to run over you. I thought we had given ample opportunity. So let me go back then with that friendly amendment being adopted. Commissioner Baker, are you still in agreement that the motion should carry? as
Yes.
amended? Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers,
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Thank you. All right. Jeremy?
Okay, Chair, with those, that concludes all of the sections of 1.8.1.
Right.
And I guess as a point of order or a question, does the commission need to adopt for final issuance 1.8.1? It would seem that with the adoption of the commission substitute and then the amendments that that we have a final rule.
I believe that it has already been done because of the way in which we proceeded as you suggested.
Great. Well, with that, Chair, the commission will turn to 1.8.4 NMAC, the proposed 1.8.4 NMAC, which is the proposed code of ethics. And I suppose a first way to divide this might be to ask for commissioner questions or motions from 1.8.4.1, which is the section regarding issuing agency, through the definition section 1.8.4.7.
Okay, let me find out where I am.
These are on pages 24 through 26 of the meeting materials.
Right. I'm sorry, I've got my pages rattled here. So while I'm dealing with my own personal crisis, I'll look to the others to do.
Chair, excuse me. I was remiss that I believe the commission should first adopt 1.8.4 as a commission substitute before going to
yes. Again, I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt 1.8.4 so that we can then proceed to amend it.
So
there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
yes.
And chair votes yes. All right. Thanks, Jeremy. Good.
No problem. And with that, Chair, I think the same division between issuing agency and definitions would be a good way to start.
Yeah, through and including definitions, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So relative to that, Commissioner Baker, in looking at the documents in front of you, do you have any questions or comments or suggestions relative to 1.8.4.1 through 1.8.4.7?
I do.
Go
On
ahead.
page 26, there's the definition of sensitive personal information. That's this subsection O.
Right.
I have no idea what it means. I mean, I can read the words, but
right.
To me, it is so vague as to I don't know how you use this.
Well, Jeremy Walker.
Chair and Commissioner Baker, this was an inclusion based on the written public comment from Somos and Pueblo Unido, which Ms. Guzman presented at the August meeting and earlier today. It is inclusive, perhaps over-inclusive, perhaps so over-inclusive as to be vague as to what information it applies to. I suppose that if we're going to kind of get serious about the question, what does it mean and what does it apply to? It's difficult because on the one hand, the state employee who might be operating under this provision might have to make an estimation as to whether or not disclosure would reasonably lead to harm or adverse consequences. I think that it must mean something closer to that than just the kind of the happenstance that might arise from the moral luck of disclosure by whatever causal chain causing harm or adverse consequences. So if I were to try to put a little bit more meaning into it, it must be whether or not the state employee who's deciding whether or not to disclose information would reasonably expect that disclosure would lead to harm or adverse consequences on the part of the person whose information it is. And I think that's maybe the best and most precise meaning I could give to this definition, which, as you say, it is broad. It is, I think, it's purposefully meant to be broad. And Walker, if you have anything to add to that, given the public comment that we've received from Somos and Pueblo Unido.
Director Ferris, I don't have anything more. I think that I would only sort of track back to what Ms. Guzman said earlier, that certainly agencies are going to receive these proposed code, a copy of this proposed code of ethics, and will be permitted under the law to make changes as they see fit. And so I think from the perspective of Somos and Pueblo Unido, I think an agency is free to kind of add further definition to what this phrase means in implementing this as a sort of actual code of ethics that would carry force as applied to the agency's employees. But again, I would agree with your comments that as drafted, it is vague and difficult to discern what information would or would not be classified as sensitive personal information, and I think difficult to reconcile with obligations under the Inspection of Public Records Act to permit otherwise permit inspection of every public record unless an exception applies. So
I'm going to assume that the most obvious example would be immigration status. And we can further assume that different employees of an agency might interpret this somewhat different. So we could have inconsistent application within the same agency. I appreciate that I don't think New Mexico has a law that says you will not disclose immigration status to anyone under any circumstance. If we did have such a law, it would make it a lot easier. But if this is going to be sent out to agencies in its present form with the comment, adopt as much or as little of this proposed code of ethics as you want, I think we might want to just flag this particular section and say, agency, if you're going to adopt this, you might want to take a close look at this particular section and figure out how it works for you so you can have some uniform application in terms of how employees interpret this. But it's a difficult, it's difficult to know how to do this, to do it properly, unless we're going to be very, very specific. For example, under no circumstances will you identify somebody's immigration status. And there may be other situations that I'm not thinking about. To the extent that people have significant others and the law allows significant others to have certain benefits, could that be a situation where people could be subject to adverse consequences? But I don't want to spend a lot of time on hypotheticals. I think we all can acknowledge that this language, as it is written, is unfortunately very vague.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Commissioner Baker raises a good point. And yet I think that the goal of protecting sensitive personal information is a valuable one for us to affirm as an ethical matter to protect. And I think it can go beyond immigration, certainly, to personal information. And so I have a couple of amendments. I know it's always difficult to draft on the fly, but I'd like to recommend that we consider amending this language so that it would read, sensitive personal information means private or identifying information about an individual who has provided the information for use by this agency, and who, instead of the word may, and who would reasonably appear susceptible to suffer harm or adverse consequences from disclosure of the information to persons outside the agency. So that it would tighten the definition up in two ways. It would narrow the term definition, the term of information, to private or identifying information. And instead of just saying who may suffer harm, to put in a little bit more judicially reasonable, judicially cognizable standard of, and who would reasonably appear susceptible to suffer harm or adverse consequences. And I think that would include what the designers and promoters of the definition were advocating, but give it a little bit more specificity to address Commissioner Baker's concern. And yet I do think this applies for more than immigration issues, and is worth keeping in. Whether you add on the flag detention like Commissioner Baker suggested or not, I would recommend this as a way of improving the definition. I mean, I'd be happy to hear from others, but I'm just, in looking at it now and trying to respond on the fly to his comment, I would commend those for consideration.
Thank you.
Chair and Commissioners Baker and Bluestone, I'd like to point the commission to a resolution that the city of Santa Fe enacted in 2017. It's resolution 2017-19, which was a resolution to protect citizens of the city of Santa Fe with respect to the residents' sensitive personal information. And in that resolution, the city of Santa Fe defined sensitive personal information in a way that's included specific, I guess, categories of information in the definition, as opposed to the kind of the language that the commission has here before it. And I do know that the group Somos en Pueblo Unido also sponsored this or advocated for this resolution. I can't speak to why Somos advocated a definition that had kind of a specific set of categories of information then, and then advocates for a broader definition now. But I'd just like to read that in the city of Santa Fe's resolution, sensitive information includes confidential identifying information, such as social security numbers or individual tax identification numbers, a person's place and date of birth, a person's status as a recipient of public assistance or as a crime victim, and a person's sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, immigration status, or national origin. And the city of Santa Fe adopted that resolution in 2017, and it might not be entirely inclusive of every problem that this type of provision seeks to address, but it certainly provides a more concrete definition of sensitive personal information than what's before the commission presently.
Thank you. Commissioner Carruthers?
Well, I think my attitude is we either go with this one or we become very specific. One or the other. You can't. The city of Santa Fe resolution may be possibly a good model, but I still think I'm willing to start with the definition we have now, unless you want to, in fact, go to very specific things that have to be excluded from being divulged. But you're just generally, I think, Stuart, Commissioner Bluestone, your recommendation only marginally improves the original motion, as far as I'm concerned, not to a great enough extent to provide any specificity or direction.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon?
I like Stuart's proposed amendment language. It's somewhere in between. I know it's still probably doesn't achieve the level of specificity that we're thinking about that it needs to address, but I like the language that he proposed. And the way I understood it to read is that means private or identifying information, blah, 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 and who would reasonably appear susceptible to suffer harm or adverse consequences as a result of disclosure of such information. Something like that. I think that's drifting in the right direction, you know, in terms of the way that I see this. So that's my at least thoughts on that for the moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Solomon. Let's hear from our resident linguist, Commissioner Villanueva.
I would opt to move for more specificity. I think Commissioner Bluestone's recommendation, although he is working on the fly, I thought it was pretty acceptable. I think he captured the spirit of where we're trying to move. I do have a question about his definition. What would his definition of private identification be? Or
Commissioner Bluestone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Villanueva. You know, I think we are dealing in, by definition, with general terms, and we're trying to give a little bit more specificity to the kind of sensitive personal information we're talking about. And there's only so much you can do, I think, other than trying to do, as Jeremy read for us from the City of Santa Fe resolution. But I think that the introduction to that Santa Fe resolution that I just heard also used the term confidential. And I think if we add that in here also, that we're giving this a little bit more specificity to address Commissioner Baker's concern and still being something that agencies can work with and live with. So I think if we said sensitive personal information means confidential, comma, private, or identifying information about an individual who is provided and who is, as Commissioner Solomon reiterated, and who would reasonably appear susceptible to suffer harm or adverse consequences, I think it's a workable definition that we can adopt and move forward with.
Okay. Back to you, Commissioner Villanueva.
I like the inclusion of confidential. Again, I see it as an improvement. I'd like a definition of private. What would that be? What would examples of private information be?
Stuart?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner, I'd again just refer to the dictionary, but I think it's understood as something that's unique to you. It's your own individual information, whether it's your address or your phone number or your sex or your status as a public beneficiary of certain benefits. I mean, I think that's all. It's not public information. It's your private information about yourself.
So it's like individually private.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
what you mean?
I
Okay,
think that's
okay,
a good way to. I think that's a good way to say it.
okay. So perhaps we should include the word individually private.
Okay, I think that would be good too. Means confidential, comma, individually private, or identifying information.
Anything else, Judy?
No, I think he's done a very good job with getting to where I would like to be. I did have, I have to agree with Commissioner Baker in that when I read that, I thought, wow, that's really broad. I wouldn't even know how to approach it. And I thank Commissioner Bluestone because I wouldn't have been able to move it in that direction on the fly, but in particular.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams?
Well, I personally liked Santa Fe's definition. And with the inclusion of the 3 words that were just mentioned, I think it's very clear. People understand it. They have some roadmap to go by in terms of what is personal information, etc. So I would go with the definition provided by Santa Fe to include Commissioner Villanueva's edition and Commissioner Bluestone's edition of those 3 words.
Yeah, that's where I'm going right now. Okay. So Stuart, if we're going to make this revision, have you had time to put it in the form of a motion, which we'll need to have in order to make this record clear?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we amend the definition of sensitive personal information so that it would read as follows. Sensitive personal information means confidential, comma, individually private, or identifying information about an individual who has provided the information for use by this agency and who would reasonably appear susceptible to suffer harm or adverse consequences from disclosure of the information to persons outside the agency.
All right, there is a motion on the floor to revise section 1.8.4.70 as written to what was just read. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to, and I don't want to beat this to death. If we go further, look at page 31, 1.8.4.13. It says non-disclosure of confidential or sensitive personal information. Subsection A says, don't disclose confidential information. Subsection B says, don't disclose sensitive personal information. And then we go back to page 26 for the definitions of what's confidential and what's sensitive personal information. And as I understand this proposed code of ethics, this is going to be sent to every state agency. Every state agency is going to be asked to adopt it or adopt something like it. And that employees can be disciplined if they violate the code of ethics. And so in terms of employee discipline, you want to make things as clear and concrete as possible, because you don't want somebody saying, well, I didn't think it would hurt somebody when I disclosed this information. And so when you use words like reasonably appear, there's a lot of wiggle room there. And so I prefer the Santa Fe definition. It's clear, it's concrete, it tells an employee, this is what I can do, this is what I cannot do. It reduces the margin of error. And so I appreciate Stewart's efforts, but I still think, as Governor Carruthers says, we're not yet where we need to be in terms of concrete. And my sense is that if Santa Fe has had this measure in place for 3 years, it's probably working okay. So I would vote against Stewart's proposal simply because I prefer the Santa Fe language.
All right, is there any other discussion?
I agree with Commissioner Baker's comments.
May we hear the Santa Fe rule again?
Jeremy?
Of course. Chair and Commissioner Villanueva, the Santa Fe resolution says sensitive information includes confidential identifying information such as social security numbers or individual tax identification numbers, a person's place and date of birth, a person's status as a recipient of public assistance or as a crime victim, and a person's sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, immigration status, or national origin.
But that's preceded by the word such as.
Chair and Commissioner Villanueva, that's correct. I mean, what the commission might do is just define sensitive personal information to mean, and then start with social security numbers or individual tax identification numbers, etc.
Anything else, Judy? Or are you digesting?
Digesting.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about it a bit. So you'd exclude the private and confidential. You'll simply go into definition by of examples. Is that correct?
Chair and Commissioner Villanueva, that's one thing that the commission might do, for a very concrete definition of sensitive personal information. I'd also remind you that Section 1.8.4.7 defines confidential information in the same way it's defined in the Governmental Conduct Act, and there's a prohibition that Commissioner Baker indicated a few moments ago, where the substantive rule provision, there's one with respect to non-disclosure of confidential information and another with non-disclosure of sensitive personal information. So the fact that the sensitive personal information doesn't include the word confidential might not change the effect of the rule, which separately regulates the disclosure of confidential information.
But Jeremy, if I may, so you're looking at 1.8.4.7 under the definition of confidential information. Is that what you're alluding to?
Chair and Commissioner Villanueva, yes.
Which says, namely, information that by law or practice is not available to the public. I see. Well, that's broad. Okay. Could you read your suggestion again?
To whom are you speaking, Judy?
I'm sorry, to Jeremy.
Chair and Commissioner Villanueva,
The Santa Fe ordinance?
the suggestion would be that sensitive personal information means the following: social security numbers or individual tax identification numbers, a person's place and date of birth, a person's status as a recipient of public assistance or as a crime victim, a person's sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, immigration status, or national origin.
Well, is that totally inclusive then? Because if I recall, when you read it initially, it said it gave examples such as colon and then the descriptions. So
Chair and Commissioner Villanueva, the Santa Fe resolution reads, sensitive information includes confidential identifying information such as, and then provides the list.
so perhaps we can include such as well, to not make it sound like it's so definitive that we can't add anything else in there.
Chair and Commissioner Villanueva, of course. So it would be sensitive personal information, means information such as, and then providing the list.
Well, it would mean confidential identifying information such as.
Even better.
Even better, I agree.
Yeah, I think the advantage of that, I hope I'm not speaking out of order, is that it has the experience of 3 years here in Santa Fe. It's got some real concrete examples in it that are inclusive but not exclusive. And it avoids the problem with the language we've got about just trying to determine what's going to possibly cause harm. And so I actually think the more I think about it now, we may be moving towards a consensus of adopting that definition and taking advantage of the benefit of that 3 years of experience and capturing what we want to protect for people.
Commissioner Carruthers, do you have any comments? Any further comments?
I would affirm what Commissioner Bluestone just said. I think we've probably reached a point where we have identified some specificity. I like the use of such as, because there may be other identifiers. And I think we included in it confidential information such as. So I think we managed to, by committee, weld together a definition that might service the various agencies.
We now have an elephant.
Yeah.
Hey, Stuart, we're in the discussion stage. There was a motion in the second. Would you care to withdraw and substitute that motion, or just withdraw it and can somebody cobble together, one of you great scriveners, a motion to which someone could second?
I think Jeremy could read it for us, and I'd be happy to make it as the motion.
Okay.
Chair and Commissioner Bluestone, I'll give it my best shot here. So sensitive personal information means confidential identifying information, such as social security numbers or individual tax identification numbers, a person's place and date of birth, a person's status as a recipient of public assistance or as a crime victim, and a person's sexual orientation, physical or mental disability, immigration status, or national origin.
Perfect. So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that motion?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. To make it simple, what about any information that may be used to identify?
And I'm sorry, where would that be in the?
If we were to use that as the definition of sensitive information, any information that is used to identify the person.
In lieu of what Jeremy just, in lieu of the such as, and
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
It just makes it simpler. I'm not adverse to the other. It's just another suggestion. I probably was out of turn in saying in making that additional recommendation.
I asked for discussion. That's fine. Does the motion sponsor want to address that?
I'd rather leave the motion like it is. I like the laundry list with a such as introduction.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion on the motion? I'm sorry, was there a second?
Looks like Commissioner Solomon wants to add something.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr.
Can
Chairman.
I hold on just a second? Can we have a second to the motion first?
Yes, it was seconded. I seconded it.
Okay, I'm sorry, Governor, I didn't hear that. Okay, Commissioner Solomon?
Am I audible?
You are.
Yes.
Oh, you're now muted again. I apologize. There you go.
Stuart had a motion on the floor. I seconded it. Stuart, did you withdraw that motion?
Yes.
Okay, then I withdraw my second. So we're in correct order here.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting that. That's my fault. All right. So there's a motion and a second now on the floor, and I'm asking for any further discussion on the motion prior to calling for a vote.
Looks like
Hearing none.
Commissioner Williams is wanting to add something, but she's muted.
Okay, can we?
I've asked her to unmute herself.
Okay.
I'd like to add religion, and the reason I say that is because of what's going on, the hate groups and so forth. And so I think that religion is another thing that should not be disclosed because of the environment today and the things that are going on, and people who might be identified as a religion that people are opposed to or have some hatred for, etc., and who could be harmed. That's just a thought.
Commissioner Bluestone, will you accept that amendment to your motion, Mr. Bluestone?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Carruthers as the seconder?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Any others? The motion and second have been amended to include the word religion. Is there any other discussion? If not, I'll call the question. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes, and I want to thank everybody. I think it was a really good discussion.
There was. Well done. Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Nice job, everybody. Okay, let's move on then to what's the next section the next sections, Jeremy, that you would like us to discuss?
I do have another one. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chairman, I think you just started with Commissioner Baker, and that's as far as we got on point 1 through point 7.
Oh, you know what? You're right. You're right. I did. That was Jeff. You started all of that.
I accept responsibility.
Thank you. You should.
Good job.
All right. So is that what you were going to raise, Judy?
No, I just happened to note that on Q, pick a uni, but it says substantial financial interest. That should be 20, the numerical characters, 20.
Thank you. Okay, so we're on 1841 through 1847. I thought we had completed it, but you're right. That's my mistake. Commissioner Bluestone.
I thought I pointed out 2 typos, but I don't know if they were corrected in what was last sent out. And it's on the first introduction to 1.8.4.1, where my version read, "This new proposed rule will create proposed code," where it should say will create a proposed code. And I just wasn't sure if that was ever picked up. And the second typo, I think it's a typo, is on the definition of business in 1.8.4.7, where instead of it saying means any person, company, or other organization that buys, sells, or provides goods or services, instead of saying including non-governmental, not-for-profit organizations, I think it should be take out the comma and have it read including non-governmental and not-for-profit organizations. And that was all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You catch those, Jeremy and Walker?
Yes.
Yes, Chair. And Chair, Walker and I were discussing this morning. I think Walker could speak to it more fully, that the State Rules Act permits us to correct typos outside of the committee motion amendment process. And so because the rule is relatively long, it might be easier for us just to take non-substantive typo corrections by email, and we'll get them into the final rule.
Okay, great. Do you have anything else of substance, Mr. Bluestone?
Mr. Chairman, no.
Thank you. Governor Carruthers?
2.7.
No comments. English is my second language.
Thank you.
What is your first?
Commissioner Solomon?
Thought Governor was bilingual for some reason. I don't know.
Trilingual.
I just wanted to understand more clearly Stuart's recommendation there. Stuart, I think you're attempting to distinguish between non-governmental organizations, right? NGOs and not-for-profit organizations.
Yeah, that a business could mean either of those, but it doesn't have to be just a non-governmental NGO, a not-profit.
Okay. Yeah, because the word that we don't have in there for non-governmental is we don't have, oh, well, I guess organizations at the end would probably cover that, but just looking at that, trying to make sure, because I know a lot of people or a lot of organizations describe themselves as NGOs and others describe themselves as not-for-profit organizations. Very two distinct kind of operations.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva, anything else on these sections?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams?
No, nothing.
Okay. Jeremy, what's the next bite we would like?
Commissioners, I think we can take next 1.8.4.8 through and including 1.8.4.10.
Okay. The risk of getting a positive response, I'll refer to Commissioner Baker.
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The first one is on 1.8.4.9C under the Principles of Public Ethics, where we title it Impartiality and Fairness. And it reads, the conduct of an officer or employee shall never be guided by 1, 2, and 3. And I thought it might be helpful to be a little bit more positive at the beginning, consistent with the title, and say the conduct of an officer or employee shall be impartial and fair and shall never be guided by 1, 2, or 3. That's all on point 9. Do you want me to go on to point 10, or do you want to take that seriatim?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. On point 10, on the disclosure of outside employment, I just want to be clear on the disclosure. We're not talking about this applying to legislators. They're excluded from the definition of an officer employee under our rules. So this, what we looked at earlier this morning about the disclosures in the Financial Disclosure Act, that's all that there is for the legislators. This wouldn't apply to them, and I just want to be sure we're understanding that. I had raised before under subsection B the issue of whether or not to require disclosure of membership on nonprofit boards. as well as for-profit boards. As you can see there, we have that only on for-profit boards, which is all that the Financial Disclosure Act requires. I'm talking now at point 10B1B5V, memberships on boards of for-profit businesses in New Mexico. I still think, as a matter of public policy, that it's good to require disclosure of your nonprofit boards as well as your for-profit boards. In fact, sometimes I think it can be more important to the public to know about your nonprofit board memberships than your for-profit board memberships in order to discern what your real interests are and what you're seeking to promote. But I've been persuaded that because the Financial Disclosure Act itself just talks about disclosing for-profit board memberships, I think rather than us trying to do this on our own in these regs, which arguably we could get away with, but maybe not. I'm not sure that a court, if it were challenged, would allow it. But I want to raise the issue because at a minimum, I would like us as a commission to be recommending to the legislature disclosure of for-profit, of not-profit board memberships, as well as for-profit board memberships. I'm open if anybody else wants to make an amendment to require the disclosure of nonprofit boards now, but I think it's a close question legally, and I'm not sure that we ought to be pushing the envelope on our authority that way here. But I did want to raise that as an important issue. The next item.
Can we comment on what you just proposed?
We're gonna get there. Okay, let's try to keep this order here. I'm gonna go through each individually and then we'll ask for motion. So if you can try to keep your comments. Thank you, Francis.
Mr. Chairman, you want me to just continue through these sections? The next one is on that subsection D. Where we talk in D1, gifts from restricted donors. This is a little complicated. Under the Gift Act, right now, a restricted donor can't give more than $250. And if he does give more than $250, it's a misdemeanor. We're changing this. We're not even allowing gifts of $250 from restricted donors. I don't think it's worded as clearly as it was intended, but as I understand it, the idea is so that this paragraph 1 says that an officer or employee may not directly or indirectly solicit a gift from and shall decline any gift offered by a restricted donor. That's what's intended. Any gift offered by a restricted donor, whether it's $250, less, more, whatever. Or any gift by any person who gives a gift because of the donee's status as an officer or employee of this agency. I don't have a problem with what's intended, but I think it needs to be rewritten to read that an officer or employee of this agency may not directly or indirectly solicit a gift from and shall decline any gift offered by either A, a restricted donor, or B, any person who gives a gift because of the donee's status as an officer or employee of the agency. And I want to be clear that what we would be doing in adopting this rule is what is commonly referred to as the no cup of coffee rule. I mean, if you're a state officer or employee, and this excludes, again, legislators, you couldn't get a cup of coffee from a lobbyist or a lobbyist employer. The governor couldn't get a cup of coffee from a lobbyist or a lobbyist employer. The attorney general, the auditor, all the people who work for them. And if we're going to do this, I just want to be sure we do it with our eyes wide open and what we're adopting here. I don't have any problem with that kind of a strict rule, but I do want to have it be perfectly clear that this language is amended to clarify what we're saying, because I think you could also read it to mean that you decline any gift offered by a restricted donor who gives it because of the donee's status. And that's what, in my discussions with Walker and emails to him and Jeremy, made clear. No, they were intending this to be a total, complete ban above and beyond the $250 allowance that the law provides. Now, I think we probably have the authority to do that, but I want to be sure we're doing it with our eyes wide open. The next item, and I'm not going to do typos, is under paragraph D4 small d, where it says the officer or employee shall take into account whether D, acceptance of the gift would provide the donor with significantly disproportionate access. It doesn't really talk about what the access is to or about. So I would recommend clarifying that to say that acceptance of the gift would provide the donor with significantly disproportionate access to the donee with respect to an official act or decision. And then this gets into a whole other big issue. Going on to the next page on H and contracting with former officers or employees. This follows the statute, but goes beyond the statute. It follows the statute in that it says that if you worked at an agency, you can't then leave the agency and represent somebody before your agency for the next 2 years if the contract has a value of $1,000 or more and is the result of an official act. But then it also repeats, as it says in B, you can't take any favorable action toward a person or business that is assisted by a former officer or employee whose action in state employment directly resulted in the contract or action. And that applies throughout the length of the time that the officer or employee leaves the agency. It's that old revolving door issue. To me, B is broader than and necessarily subsumes A. That if you're banned for life from assisting somebody, if it results from an official act you took, then if you're banned from assisting them, you're banned from representing them, not just for 2 years, but for life. And I think what was originally intended in the statute and somehow got amended away, and then we're picking up this amendment in the reg, are 2 different types of bans. The first ban is that there should be a lifetime ban on you working on anything in which you were substantially and directly involved while you were at the agency. That's what B says, and I think that's what we ought to keep. But A talks about representing anybody before your agency after you leave them, and I think you ought to be banned from representing anybody before your agency for the 2 years as proposed, just like we ought to recommend that legislators have a 2-year cooling off period before they can lobby the legislature. But I don't think it ought to have to be tied in to the action having to be the direct result of your official conduct. You're an official act. So I think this needs a fair amount of rework. I think that H should keep A, but have it be an absolute 2-year ban on representing anybody for pay, regardless of what the matter involves. And B ought to be a lifetime ban on anything in which you were personally and directly involved while you were at the agency. And actually, then that's in conflict with 2B. Well, I guess maybe I'm a little confused here. A talks about contracting and B talks about representation. I guess if we're going to do the 2-year recommendation in the contracting, we could do the 2-year ban in appearing before your prior agency, just like the possible 2 years we would recommend on legislators. So I'm going to leave it like that for now, Mr. Chairman.
Judge, are you frozen? Looks like you might be frozen.
Maybe I froze him.
No, here he is. He's back.
Off, and now I just miraculously got let back in. So whoever did that, thank you for letting me back in.
Zoom gods.
Yeah. So was that it, Stuart?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you. Commissioner Carruthers?
Only comment is it sounds from Commissioner Bluestone's report on this that we're not going to be quite ripe to make a judgment on this today if we're going to do that much rewriting.
I share that concern. Commissioner Solomon?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm not hearing.
Mr. Solomon, you're muted. I've asked you to unmute yourself here.
Steve, okay.
There you are.
Okay, here I am. Basically the same concern that Governor Carruthers reiterated just a couple of minutes ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Villanueva?
I agree, we're not ready.
Commissioner Williams?
I've asked you to unmute yourself, Commissioner Williams. I muted you earlier when your phone was ringing. Commissioner Williams?
Yes, I don't think we're ready either, but I had some questions with regards to some of the issues. And now I forgot what some of them were with regard to some of the things that Stuart mentioned that I had some questions on. But I don't think we're ready to go to press yet.
Thank you.
Can we ask questions?
Yes, this is your time.
Oh,
you
okay.
can bring up anything you want to about these sections.
The first one. Now, as far as the gifts are concerned, we talked about what gifts for $250 could be given up to $250. And I agree with Stuart that I don't think anybody should be given a gift who is employed with the state. And the issue of, I think you mentioned something, is it too stringent to have a lobbyist to give a cup of coffee to the governor? Was that right, Stuart? What
Yes,
was your point on that?
that the way this rule reads, a lobbyist or a lobbyist employer could not give a cup of coffee to the governor.
Well, I agree with that. And I know as a procurement officer, where I handled large procurements for the Army, we were not allowed to take a match or a calendar or anything from someone who was contracting or proposing to contract with us. So I don't think that's too restrictive, and I agree with that. And then I had another question in the beginning about outside employment. And what were your recommended changes there, or your comments about outside employment?
You talking about the contracting?
Well, you talked about outside employment.
Yeah, I wanted to be clear that we're only talking about officers and employees other than legislators.
Okay. So if a person who is not a legislator, but who works for the state government, are they allowed to have outside employment unless it conflicts with their position?
Yes, as long as they disclose it in accordance with the law.
And they disclose it to who? Their supervisor?
Yeah, Jeremy may want to comment on that. I think they have to file a form with their agency. Jeremy, do you know about that?
I think it's agency by agency, Commissioners Bluestone and Williams.
Do they have to get permission to have outside employment from their state position?
No.
No?
You have to
Commissioner
disclose it in
Williams,
writing that you have outside employment with your agency head or your supervisor.
So I'm sorry, so they can have outside employment as long as it doesn't conflict with their job, and they do not have to tell their supervisor that they have an outside employment.
They do have to tell their supervisor.
Regardless of whether it conflicts or not.
Yes.
Okay. And does the supervisor have the authority to deny that?
Commissioner Williams, I think the answer is no.
The supervisor cannot deny outside employment. Is that what you're saying?
So long as the employment is outside of job duty.
Their job duties. Okay. And on page 28, where it's B2B, is that struck from this code? Where it says an officer employee of the agency is not disqualified from taking an official action. Has that been struck down?
Commissioner Williams, no, it's just the lettering that's been struck because subsection B has been deleted, and as a result, there's only one subsection, which means that you don't need to have the A there in the front of that. So it will now just be B2, disqualification, followed by what you just read.
I think she's asking about isn't B being stricken?
Yes.
Oh, I thought she was referring to A.
No,
My
B.
apologies. B is stricken, yes.
It is taken out. Yes. Okay. I'm visually impaired, so it's a little harder for me to read these things that are a little lighter. Okay, I think that was my questions, aside from the fact that I do think on the basis of our conversation that we have to revise this to some degree before it's published.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. I think there's pretty much general agreement on that, that we, as far as this section we're going over now and the remainder, we'll need to postpone anything. But it does seem to me that, well, what's your preference? Should we go forward with declarations as we have done for the remaining provisions, or would you prefer that we submit those in staff to write and tackle this at the next? But either way, to tackle this at the next meeting.
No, they won't. Okay. But there's no way we can vote.
Mr. Chairman.
Is it possible?
Somebody talking to somebody else here. I'm getting some.
I'm going to go ahead and mute Commissioner Baker, who's talking.
Thank you.
I've muted Commissioner Baker.
Thank you. Okay. What are your thoughts, folks?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I think we're going to have to do some major rewrites. In fact, we're going to meet any of Commissioner Bluestone's concerns, and that will require. I don't think that can be done by this committee in an open session. I think it has to be done with the commissioners that we sort of tasked to fly spec this whole thing, and that was Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Villanueva, and Bluestone. So I think working with the staff, they ought to come back and see if we can kind of resolve these issues and report back to the commission. But I'm not sure I want to sit through an hour and a half line by line rewrite when in fact it ought to be more thoughtful in doing it on the fly.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, but I want to make sure everybody else is in accord with that. Does that make sense to the rest of you, Commissioner Solomon, Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Bluestone?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chairman.
Judy, you're good with that?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Commissioner Baker, are you back on?
I've asked him to unmute himself.
Jeff, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's forego the remainder of the discussion under item 10, and we will leave the three commissioners who have done a very nice job. And I want to thank you personally for taking this on and doing such a good bit of work on it. And we'll go back to allowing you and staff to iron out the remaining issues relative to 1.8.4. So that leads us to item 11, which needs to be taken up in executive session.
Can I just briefly, if possible, just to make a future commission meeting more effective and efficient? It sounds like we've resolved all the issues with 1.8.1.
Yes.
And so if we could get a vote to adopt those, that'd be great. And then that way we don't have to.
I thought we had.
Yeah, Walker, that's adopted.
Okay, yeah. Then I'm sorry.
I can understand.
I was just following the agenda.
Your confusion is certainly.
Sorry.
Understood. No, that's fine, Walker. Don't worry about it. All right. So with that, is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second. All right. We Commissioner Baker.
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Yes.
Commissioner Brothers.
Yes.
Mr. Solomon.
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva.
Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Yes.
And Chair, to be clear, that motion was under the authority of Section 1015 on H3 and H7 of the Open Meetings Act.
Yes. Thank you. That's relative to administrative adjudicatory proceedings and attorney-client privilege pertaining in litigation.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I knew that. I should have stated that.
I did as well, but
I knew that.
they're not all as well versed as we are.
I've been practicing law for years. I knew that, and I just I let it go by. I'm sorry.
Well, because of that authority, it is assumed. So. Okay, Walker, you need a couple of minutes?
No, I'm ready to just open up the rooms. I'm opening them now. Are we all here? I believe so.
Okay, now I am unmuted. Everybody back?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now we are back in public open session. Relative to, and I lost the number. Oh, there it is.
32.
Administrative complaint number 2020-032. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the action on the administrative complaint, dismissing it for lack of jurisdiction.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, I'll call the question. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bluestone?
Yes.
Mr. Brothers?
Yes.
Mr. Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Okay. The next matter on the agenda, item 13.
Chair, before you move to item 13, the staff seeks a motion coming out of executive session to participate as amicus curiae in State Gutierrez.
Sorry, I apologize. Some inefficient staff member left that off my agenda, so I will have to have a word with those people.
That's not perfect.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay. Is there the chair entertain a motion to approve the staff seeking application for amicus status in the Supreme Court matters as described?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bluestone?
Yes.
Commissioner Carruthers?
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes.
Commissioner Villanueva?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Thank you. All right. Now can I move to 13? Are we good, Jeremy?
Yes, sir.
All right. The next meeting I believe we have scheduled as per our previous discussions and votes would be for the first Friday in December, date of which is not right there at my fingertips. What is that? Anybody got a calendar handy?
December 4.
Okay. So the next meeting for everybody is December 4 at 9 a.m. And as far as I'm concerned, we keep it on Zoom. I mean, it's going to be a while until we meet in person. So that moves us to public comment.
Great.
Walker, have you invited everybody?
Just like, I think we could go through everyone since we're now down to only 6 or 7 public participants. I'll just go through one by one. Ask.
I'll leave it to you. That's fine.
Have any comment? Cliff Rees, I'm asking you to unmute yourself. You can either accept it or not. Do you have any public comment?
I have no public comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rees. I'm asking a participant named Jack to unmute themselves. Jack, do you have any comments? No response. Okay. I'm asking JHAR 2015 to unmute themselves. Would you like to comment? Okay, no response. I'm asking Ken Resnick to unmute himself. Ken, do you have any comments to offer the commission? No response. Okay, and then we have the Ethics Watch and Mr. Ortiz. I'm asking them both to mute themselves. If they'd like to offer any public comment, they're welcome to. But looks like that's it. Wendy, our Chief Financial Officer, can offer comments as well if she'd like. But I see she's in the meeting. So.
All right. So,
Chairman Lang,
yes.
I have a question. Are we going to discuss 1.8.4.11 and 12 of the
At the next meeting.
That's for the next meeting?
Yeah, because of where we got stuck in that one section, we're just going to move the whole rest of it, and that way everybody can look at that and perhaps submit through the either directly to staff or via the three commissioners tasked and agreed to work with staff on editing. That way we don't spend the rest of the day on maybe not getting anywhere.
So to clarify for my understanding, we will discuss 1.8.4.11 through 16, I guess 16, and 17. Those will be discussed at the next meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and on 1.8.4. I guess that's 15 on page 33, has the ethical conduct in the workplace, has that all been stricken? Has this all been eliminated?
Yeah, I will defer to staff to answer that.
On page 33.
32.
On page 33. Chair and Commissioner Williams, yes, that has been stricken, but the provisions have been greatly amplified in the proposed 1.8.4.15 regarding sexual harassment and 1.8.4.16 regarding substance abuse.
Okay, so that this ethical conduct in the workplace has been replaced by these other two issues.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chair, before you do, I just want to remind the commissioners, because we're trying to get this op-ed out today, I'm going to send the op-ed after the Secretary of State has made their edits. And I'm going to ask if any chair does not, or any commissioner does not want their name added to the byline. Please let me know.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
On that point, Jeremy, why don't you send it out, and if you don't hear from me, I'm good to go.
Okay.
And instead of waiting for me to wander around and look at an email,
Yep.
I'll take a look at it. If I don't respond to you, I'm good.
Same here.
Okay, that's what I was hoping for. If you don't approve, let me know. Otherwise, your name's going on.
Silence token consent.
I do want to, if I may, I would like to express my appreciation to Commissioner Bluestone for initiating that op-ed.
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart. Agreed. Thank you, Judy, for.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay. So there's a motion and a second to adjourn. Any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for your patience and good work today, and we'll see you in a couple of months, if not sooner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everybody stay safe.
Everybody,
Bye.
be good. Bye-bye.
Thank you.